All right, it's time for another update and forecast on the California wildfires. First thing I noticed, just based on the satellite imagery, we're seeing a very similar situation to what we had really the last 2 or 3 days, where that smoke layer in the early morning hours keeps the activity down, and then once you get to the hotter, drier parts of the day, then the winds pick up as well. You really start to see that fire activity pick up, and you see some of those pyrocumulus clouds coming off of especially the Dixie Fire as of right now. So I'm just going to be trying to pull up the video on another screen here so I can keep an eye on the live chat throughout this video. And alright, I think we are good to go. So main fires we're going to be focusing on throughout the course of this video. Big one is the Dixie Fire. We're going to spend the large majority of our time talking about all the recent numbers coming out for that one, both when it comes to acreage burned, the containment, structures destroyed, how many resources are on it. But we're also really going to be focusing on the fire weather forecast for the Dixie Fire because unfortunately we have some challenging conditions coming in over the next few days. Today wasn't that bad. It was certainly warm, it was certainly dry, and that's why you see all this activity picking up over the last hour to 2 hours. But as we get into Wednesday and Thursday, it almost looks like there's another heat wave coming to the Pacific Northwest, and some of that heat will be finding its way into Northern California as well. So once the temperatures get back into the mid-90s, our relative humidity drops down into the single digits, that's when the fires can really start picking up. And that's also when it can just be active 24 hours a day versus just active in the evenings like we have been seeing the last few days. So just, again, looking at this imagery right here, this basically sums up the various fires we will be going into, but most likely spending about 90% of our time just on the Dixie Fire, as I actually put a poll out earlier this morning to see what fires you guys were the most interested in, and I believe 88% of people said talk about the Dixie Fire. So I will mention the Mcfarland Fire, the Monument Fire, the River Complex, and the Antelope Fire, but large majority of the time will be spent on the Dixie. Now, you notice how much smoke is coming off the Dixie right now. There's a couple areas here where you see that white puff. That gives you a good indication that there's a pyrocumulus cloud. And that's usually evidence for some extreme fire behavior, and it looks like there's a very large plume coming off of there. So it would be interesting to see if we can actually find a live camera of that as well. Two other things I noticed on the satellite imagery for the Dixie Fire. One, that northern section of the fire once again active up there, and then that western edge that we hadn't seen active over the last week, but it seemed to flare up yesterday. It looks like we still have a somewhat large smoke plume coming off of that western edge right there. So 3 key areas to keep our eye on for the Dixie Fire. But again, the main one is that northeastern section where it looks like there is just a massive smoke plume coming off of there right now. So let's actually see. I loaded this up. I'm not sure if this is the best camera to try to view that smoke plume. Let's see where this camera is actually located. It looks like this camera is actually looking up. This might work. So this is the Sloat Mountain camera. It looks like it's a pretty similar angle to that East Quincy camera that we sometimes look at in these videos. And I'll just let that load. In the time being, I'll just quickly go over the different numbers for the wildfires just to get that out of the way, and then we can start really diving into the different details. Dixie Fire hasn't seen an update since when we were talking about it last night, still at 489,000 acres, which does put it at the second largest wildfire in the history of California. Containment remains at 21%. We've seen a lot of growth over the last few days, and as that overall fire perimeter gets larger, your percentage contained will get smaller, as we saw that jump from 35% down to 21%. Now, there are a large number of evacuation orders in place, and there might actually be some new ones as well. So when it comes to those, always check the links in the description. I try to put all the relevant links I can think of in the description, but if not, the go-to sites are always CAL FIRE and InsaWeb. That's the two kind of staples to wildfire information right there. When it comes to the structures destroyed on the Dixie Fire, I actually haven't looked at this one yet, so I'm interested to see if this has updated since we were doing our update and forecast last night. Oh, interesting. It actually went down. So when we were during the update and forecast last night, this number was 627. So not exactly sure why that number would have gone down. I'll see if we can look into that throughout the course of this live stream to see why that may have been. So when it comes to the resources on the Dixie Fire, this is where some of the good news comes in. We have 30 helicopters, 525 engines, 129 dozers, 135 water tenders, 5,800 personnel, and 97 crews. Now, actually, one thing I do want to double check before we continue any farther. I thought CAL FIRE was going to be doing an update at 7 p.m., but it doesn't look like on the CAL FIRE page. That's also a good link to get some wildfire information. CAL FIRE Butte County Facebook page. Although it doesn't look like they're doing a 7 p.m. report. Let's see if the Plumas County Sheriff's Office is doing their 7 p.m. report. Doesn't look like it. So I don't believe we're missing out on anything there. I'll maybe check back to see if they post any videos at some point throughout this live stream. Again, I cleared out my schedule for the rest of the day, so we should just be diving into these wildfires as for really the rest of the evening and into tonight. The main reason I cleared my schedule is we are seeing a lot of activity on all of our wildfires right now. Again, they've been calm in the morning hours as you have all that smoke just sitting over the fires that keeps the temperatures down, that keeps the winds down as well. But then every single day, we've been breaking through that smoke inversion, and you can see what happens once that inversion breaks. You got the large pyrocumulus cloud on the northern section of the Dixie, the northeastern section as well, and then all our other fires like Antelope, the River Complex, Monument looks like there's a ton of smoke coming off of it right now, and Mcfarland as well. So one key thing to look at here is that most of that smoke is moving up towards the north, and actually it almost looks like it's moving to the northwest right there. So that could actually be some good news when it comes to the air quality for Californians. Again, bad news for air quality if you're in places like Nevada or Oregon where you can see a lot of that smoke is spreading out. So one thing I do want to look at here, this is sometimes the best way to just see how intense the wildfires are right now, where you can actually see the red dots popping up where the fire is the most active. And as it gets later, we should see those fires start to flare up. We'll zoom into the Dixie Fire here so it's easier to see. Looks like majority of that activity right on that northeastern section right there. Again, we do have some heat coming off of the north right here and again on that western side, which seem to have flared up over the last couple days, but that northeastern section is certainly the area that's burning the hottest right now. And looks like we're getting some heat around that Lake Almanor area, but not as much as yesterday. So that is actually some great news. Remember, in yesterday's forecast, that was a huge concern because how hot that northeastern section looks right there, that's how hot the area right around Lake Almanor looked yesterday. So looking at the Cal Topo map, we'll go to the live hotspots so we can see where a lot of this heat's kicking up. I think, yeah, you can see majority of that heat being produced on that northeastern section right there. But what we were so worried about yesterday was right here around the east shore of Lake Almanor had a huge hotspot and a huge pyrocumulus cloud coming off of it. And the reason that was so concerning is if you look at the structures, we have the east shore of Lake Almanor right there and Westwood as well. Yesterday, the hotspots were going right up to Westwood and then also right up to those structures. But it looks like, based on that hotspot right there, based on the fact that we don't see a very bright red area right to the right of Lake Almanor right now like we were seeing yesterday, looks like that has calmed down, which I think is some great news because yesterday it was looking dangerously close to the areas around Westwood and those structures on the east shore of Lake Almanor. Now, with that being said, part of the reason we're not seeing the hotspots there, one, it could be just because the fire is a lot less active throughout the day today, but it also might be because the smoke is so thick that the satellite's not able to get through there. That's always something I have to preface when we're looking at these satellite imageries and the hotspots. When you get all of this thick smoke over your fire, sometimes it's hard for the satellite to actually break through that to see where those hotspots are. But again, key spot on the Dixie Fire is certainly that northeastern section of the fire, where right there you can see a giant pyrocumulus cloud. One of the biggest ones I think we've seen throughout the entire lifetime of this fire. So let's actually see if we can find that on some cameras. The Zoom meeting went live at 7 p.m. So that's interesting. They decided to do a Zoom today. Glad I took one look at the live chat. I'm not seeing it. If anybody has the link to that, you could post it in the live chat. I might try to be able to click on that, and then we could watch it together, and we could do what we've done in the past where we watch the update together, and then I can try my best to answer any questions that you guys might have in the live chat. But as far as I can see, I'm not seeing any links to any updates by CAL FIRE. So again, I'll maybe check back there. Looks like it's, just a Zoom. I was hoping they would be doing a Facebook Live, but doesn't look like it. Hopefully they post it to their YouTube channel or something, and I'll be able to just stream it. But back to the Dixie Fire, I want to see if we can see that giant smoke plume, because it looks like there's a huge one coming off of that eastern section of the fire. Right here, you can see that little plume in the distance, but throughout the day, not that much activity. That's where you have that thick smoke inversion. Just to go back there, think about all that smoke right there. That's almost blocking out the sunlight, keeping your temperatures down, which keeps your winds down, and that's what moderates our fire behavior in the mornings. But then, as you can see, as you get into the evening, you start to break through that inversion. It almost kind of reminds me of boiling water right there, especially at the end here, where you get some boiling right a little bit over that smoke inversion, and then it just starts to break through, and then that's where you start to get some much more extreme fire activity. So let's just close this out, see if there's any other interesting cameras to look at. Let's see. I'll just scroll down. If you have any camera recommendations, be sure to let me know in the live chat, and I'll see if I can click on one. The Dire Mountain camera yesterday was absolutely insane, so I'd be interested to see what that one looks like today. While that's loading, I could just pull up what that Dire Mountain camera looked like yesterday. I posted it to my Twitter, and right here. So this is what the Dire Mountain camera looked like yesterday. We had that massive smoke plume coming up and started seeing the flames coming over this hill here. You can just see how much fuel is in this area and just how bright that fire was burning as well. You can see it even better as it switches to the night vision. So again, that was the Dire Mountain camera yesterday, seeing lots of activity. And again, as the mornings are the calmer time for the fires and we break through that inversion in the evening hours, I believe I got this screenshot at about maybe 8 p.m., 9 p.m. You can see that it actually switches to the night vision camera halfway through this video. So that's just a perfect example of how these fires have been weird over the last few days, where it's been actually calmer at 4 p.m., which is usually your hottest, driest, windiest, most dangerous wildfire time of the day, and more active as you get to 8 and 9 p.m. So that's why I've kind of shifted my time for when I actually do these videos, because we have been seeing a lot more activity later in the day. So let's see what the Dire Mountain camera looks like today. Looks like there is still a large amount of activity going on it. starting to come farther down the mountain. Not sure why they shifted the camera angle there. That other one had a lot better shot of the smoke plume. But yeah, I can't see too much on this imagery right now. If we go back, yeah, we'll just close that one out and then try to... Oh, that one looks like it could have a shot of that big smoke plume. So that one for the time being is freaking out, so I'll just let that do its thing for a second. But first, yeah, really freaking out. First, we'll just go back to here. I'll mention where on the Dixie Fire it's burning the most actively on that northern edge and especially that northeastern section. That's why we were trying to look for that live camera to see if we can actually see what this section right down here looks like from the ground, because that's one of the most active hotspots that we've seen since the Dixie Fire started. And if we look at the smoke plume, I'd say it's one of the largest pyrocumulus clouds that we've seen since the Dixie Fire started. Right there, that just breaks through the inversion and looks like there's a lot of activity going on right there. So I'm going to close that camera down. That one is freaking out. So just zooming in here to the Dixie Fire, we can talk about where a lot of the growth on the Dixie Fire has been recently. We've had a pretty big shift in the winds. You remember what seemed to be the first 3 weeks of this fire, we had constant southerly and southwesterly winds, and that's why most of our growth was to the north of this fire. You remember once those southerly winds were able to pick up some of the hot spots right in here, throw it over the previous containment lines, and then that northern edge grew 15 miles in one day. So I keeping an eye on the live chat. Somebody said, dang, the hotspot on Dyer Mountain is headed straight toward Westwood and the peninsula. So that is something that we were looking at. I'll get back to what I was saying earlier in a second. Let's reload this. Actually, we'll zoom out and reload it to see where those hotspots are right now. So it matches the satellite imagery pretty well. Remember, on that satellite imagery, it looks like there's a lot of activity on that northern section, that northeastern section, and a bit more on that western section than we had been seeing in previous days. So if we look at those hotspots, I would say there are definitely some areas for concern right now. We have some concern where that western side has flared up, where it wasn't previously seeing that much activity. And you can see that is near these structures. Again, those orange dots are where the structures are. The yellow, orange, and red squares are where the satellite imagery is picking up hotspots. So on that western section, you can see we do have a hotspot near those structures right there. And I believe this is perhaps the hotspot or the heat signature that somebody was mentioning in the live chat was moving closer to Westwood and perhaps the peninsula, either that one or that one. So that one certainly looks like it's moved farther south from yesterday, which is interesting because our winds have been mostly... that actually makes sense. There's almost a couple times in this imagery where the winds almost look like they are blowing from a northwesterly direction. I'd say the predominant wind throughout the day has been from the southwest. That's why you see the smoke going directly up, almost like it's moving to Idaho. But then where you get those large smoke plumes, that's where you get some erratic gusty winds around the plume. And in some of those cases, you could see some of that smoke. It really looks like it's moving in all directions right now. It must be absolutely frustrating to try to fight this fire because it's moving west over here, it's moving northeast over here, it's moving east right here. All kinds of different wind activity going on this, which I imagine makes strategy very difficult on a fire like this. And every time we reload this page, it looks like that pyrocumulus cloud on that northeastern section just keeps getting larger and larger right there. I would say that's the biggest pyrocumulus we have seen since the Dixie Fire started. But there is some good news on this map, I would say, is Yeah, so wind is blowing to the northeast now. I would definitely agree with that just based on the overall smoke. We do have some changes here and there, but overall the smoke appears to be blowing to the northeast, and that's typical this time of the day. Throughout the afternoon hours, we get the up canyon winds, and it really shifts the overall wind direction, so it's mostly blowing from the southwest. And you can see that's why a lot of our growth on this fire is either to the north or the northeast. At the hottest, driest part of the day, that's around like 4 to 6 p.m. That's where we get those southerly and southwesterly winds that just continue to push that fire farther to the north and the northeast. So yesterday and the day before, the majority of our winds were actually coming straight from the west. The reason for that was as this low pressure system went through Washington, we can look at an old forecast model and actually watch that low go through. If we go back in time a little bit to see what that low did, and that kind of describes. I'll just read this comment real quick. Hey Holt, can you report on what to expect for smoke and air quality over the next couple of days or week? I can do that. So we'll come down here. I'm actually interested to know this as well. Good news for California is just based on the satellite imagery, it looks like most of that smoke is now blowing more to Nevada, Oregon, and Idaho. You can notice how much cleaner the air looks over the Sacramento Valley right now than it did in previous days. And if we actually want to look at the air quality right now, we'll go down here. This will show us what it currently is. Zooming in here. I would almost disagree with this map. I feel like this one still has to be updated because in the last 30 minutes to the last hour, we have seen much more smoke coming off of the Dixie Fire. So I think the next time they update this map, this is supposed to be showing current air quality. I think the next time they update this, we're going to see, especially that area over the Dixie Fire, work into that very unhealthy category because that smoke plume right there is the largest one we've seen, or at least I think we've seen since the Dixie Fire began. So most likely going to see worse air quality around Northern California and working into Oregon and Nevada as well than in previous days. But better air quality if you're in places like the Bay Area. Over the last few days, or the last 2 days really, we've had stronger onshore winds. And what that's been doing is basically pushing some of that smoke out. You can actually see how that works here. I could zoom in. At one point, all of that unhealthy air was over the Bay Area, over Monterey Bay as well. And then we had strong onshore winds, which is typical for this time of the year. And you can see how it pushed that smoke right away from the coast. And actually, we should be able to see an animation of that. I haven't looked at this, so this might either agree with what I just said or it'll prove me wrong, but it's always a great animation to look at. So the key thing I'm looking at is during the afternoon hours when you get the strongest onshore winds, if it acts to push some of that smoke out of the Bay Area. And yeah, it's exactly what we were talking about. That onshore wind right there, you can see how it pushes it. Looks like Sacramento even got some clear skies at one point today. You can just see how it usually fills in right at the bay, and you're just seeing a larger area where there's almost a pocket of clean air. And then some of that smoke moving off into the Pacific, some of that smoke moving into Nevada. So pretty interesting simulation to look at right there. I always like to look at that one for the air quality, and I think I put the link for that in the description. So what we were saying is, we were talking about why the fire has mostly been growing to the east over the past 2 days. You can see a lot of those hot spots on the Dixie Fire up here are to the east. A lot of the hot spots right here and where you see the most activity on the eastern side of the fire. And the reason for that is this low pressure system that came through. This was Sunday, and then, what day is it today? Monday? Yeah, Sunday and then into Monday as well. as that low pressure system came through, and we especially saw this yesterday evening, you think about the counterclockwise circulation around it. On the bottom edge here, you can see how those arrows are going straight west to east. So it's spinning like that, had our winds going straight west to east as that low moved through. And the impact that had on our wildfires was, as those westerly winds come in, they just continue to push the fire farther and farther to the east. And over the next few days, that we'll actually load up the most recent forecast model to see what the fire weather forecast might look like moving forward. Just scrolling in here, you can see that low is gone, and there has been a shift in the weather pattern. You can see that, I think, shows it pretty well right there. We've transitioned back to a more typical pattern for California during the summers. There's just a giant ridge over almost the entire west. There actually might be some more record heat up in Washington and Oregon, which I know they're not going to be happy about because they already had that huge heat wave earlier in the year where places like Portland were 115 degrees 3 days in a row, and it did lead to some bad wildfires in Washington and Oregon as well. So with that ridge over basically the entire west, this is, again, getting into Wednesday, we're going to return to a much hotter, drier pattern than before. When that low came in, it did bring some slightly windier conditions with it, but it also cooled our temperatures down. I'll just back it up so you can see that low. As that low came through Washington, it did bring some cooler temperatures to us, which actually helped us the last couple days, and especially in those early morning hours where we had moderated fire conditions. But as we shift into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, majority of the west is just under that ridge. So that is, again, going to bring some hotter, drier conditions with it. And unfortunately, some very challenging wildfire conditions as well. So just looking at that in the relative humidity, you can see there are a couple flashes of some moisture here and there, but the overall pattern, if you were just to take the average of everything, that's almost kind of what it looks like. Very dry air over California. And again, that is going to be mixed with some very warm temperatures as well. We can actually tie all of this together by looking at windy.com here for a second. And this could actually be a good indication of what our conditions are going to look like over the next couple days, because like I said, there are some challenging conditions coming in. So if we look at, we'll just click right about there. That seems to be where one of the biggest hotspots on the Dixie Fire is right now. Our forecast for tomorrow, we'll look at the top 3 fire weather variables: temperature, winds, and humidity. Temperatures tomorrow, you can see that warm up happening as that ridge starts to develop over the west. Our temperatures get back into the 90s, and that ridge continues to strengthen into Wednesday, where our temperatures rise up again. We're starting to get into the mid-90s, and then Thursday, still warm temperatures in the mid-90s once again. So looks like slightly more challenging conditions over the next 3 days than we have had over the last 3 days, which again is concerning because we've had a lot of fire growth over the last couple of days. And then combined with those warm temperatures, we're going to have some very dry air as well. The reason humidity is so important is because the drier the air is, the drier the fuels get, and the easier it is for that fire to spread and for new hot spots or for new spot fires to occur. So tomorrow we're going to be in the low 90s with relative humidity in the low teens. Wednesday, this should be even lower. Looks like we're getting into the low teens and even the single digits in some places. So that is going to be a big concern moving forward with the Dixie Fire. Let's see winds. I think winds is actually always the biggest factor that leads to fire growth. We'll go to tomorrow afternoon to see how our winds are looking. Looks like there are some areas of the Dixie Fire where we get some gusts up to 25 miles per hour, but where we're seeing the most growth on this area just east of Lake Almanor, weaker winds than in past days. So I'd say if we need one silver lining in the fire weather forecast, it would be with the winds. That's pretty typical when you get a large ridge over an area like this. You can see how far apart those lines of constant pressure are. Good rule of thumb, you might not know this, but looking at a weather map like this, the closer those lines are together, you can see those isobars, lines of constant pressure, closer those are, typically the stronger your winds are going to be. And when they're very far apart like that, the weaker your winds are going to be. And in my opinion, wind is the number one factor that leads to extreme fire growth. So if we need one silver lining, I think that might be it, as we're no longer seeing those 35 mile per hour wind gusts that we had when the Dixie Fire was under that red flag warning. So I would say that is some good news right there. But where the bad news comes in is just looking at the Dixie Fire right now. We have a lot of activity going on, especially this afternoon, and especially on that northeastern section where that massive pyrocumulus cloud is blowing up as of right now. I'd say one of the biggest ones we've seen throughout the entire lifetime of the Dixie Fire. And we're actually going to be having more challenging conditions over the next few days. As we get into Wednesday and Thursday, we're getting back up into the mid 90s, and our relative humidity is dropping into the low teens in the single digits. So I usually don't try to be pessimistic usually don't try. I try to find the silver lining in things, but it is going to be a challenge over the next few days, and it just updated again. So it'll have a more recent view of that massive pyrocumulus cloud there. Definitely the biggest one that we've seen, and I want to see how hot this hot spot looks right here, because that is the biggest pyrocumulus cloud I think I've maybe ever seen on satellite imagery. I can't exactly remember a time when I've seen a bigger one, and you can see why that is right here. One thing I'll point out, how calm the fire was throughout the entire morning hours. It'll reset in a second here. Maybe a little hot spot on the north, little hot spot on the northeast, couple little puffs on the west here. But then once we broke through that inversion this afternoon, especially that northeastern section of the fire, glowing about as hot as we have seen. So let's focus in on that area, because I think that is one of the big concerns. Actually, first, I will just take a sip of water and take a quick look at the live chat. So I always apologize to you guys for I completely missed the live chat the majority of the time. I still haven't mastered that ability to look at a map, talk about the map, and read the live chat at the same time. But I'm working on it right now. So I see a couple questions about different towns that are in danger versus the past. Alrighty, yeah, so I think... Oh, interesting. So somebody just said ABC10 is streaming an update on YouTube, and we've been looking for an update this entire time. Let's go. I don't want to close down those Facebook links, so let's go open up a new browser here. Let's see, YouTube. Don't think I'm signed into this one. Okay, so I think this is the CAL FIRE update that we've been looking for quite some time. Just a quick ad. Another quick ad. Alrighty, I'll unplug the... If you guys have any questions, just post it in the live chat, and I'll try to answer any questions you guys might have.
Tonight we'll be giving you an update purely on the east zone of the fire. There's been a rearrangement of resources, and the CAL FIRE team number 3, will be giving their update tomorrow night on the west zone of the fire. So any questions that you guys have coming in, please try and keep them to our zone, because we will be unable to answer those questions on the west zone. So tonight we'll be talking specifically about the east zone of the Dixie Fire. Current acreage is 482,047 acres, and we've actually been managed to gain, due to the efforts of all firefighting crews, 1%. I know it's a 1% gain, but we're at 22% right now. Those firefighting crews total 5,996 people. We have some speakers lined up for tonight. The first one of those speakers will be from our very own California Interagency Incident Management Team 4, our Operations Section Chief, Carl Jacobson.
Good evening. We'll start in the south. Everything in the southern edge is holding within its current footprint. We do have resources engaged in here, continuing to mop up and secure the line. Everything in the south end is looking good. We're feeling really confident that we're going to be able to keep the fire in its current footprint as we move through the southern area of the fire. As we come around towards DP 219 and Immigrant Road, this has been secure for a few days. We're looking at being able to call this contained either later today or tomorrow, so we're feeling very confident it's going to stay in here. We had additional resources in the Crescent Mills area today, continuing to mop up and secure around the community as well. Today we were also successful in the Ketty Point area between Indian Valley and the North Arm of getting this line across on the southern end, so we were able to get indirect line all the way across Ketty Ridge. As we move further north, crews continue to work on Diamond Mountain Road and hold Diamond Mountain Road as the fire continues to back down to the road. We have resources engaged, ready to hold the road. As we move up to the Lone Rock area, the fire has progressed into the Bear Valley area, but in the last 2 days, working closely with our counterparts from the West Zone, we've been able to go direct and get around the fire's edge all the way on the north side, all the way down the east, and tonight we're going to be going direct on the southern piece of this, attempting to bring this back into Diamond Mountain Road. So a lot of good work has been happening in there. Today was the first day in a few days that we had good, clean air in there, so we were able to use our helicopters, both Type 1 and Type 2 helicopters. We had a period of about 3 hours or so that we were flying all of the aircraft we had on the incident in this Lone Rock area, and then down in the Hunt Canyon, Ketty Ridge area as well. This area in Coyote Peak, we are still working in here, trying to get a ridge line that we can go ahead and tie back into the sheep fire. Everything that we do have that hit the sheep fire perimeter has checked itself up, and there's no growth in this sheep fire area. As we move around to Dyer Mountain and this area in here, we have put a piece of indirect line in and are going to continue constructing that line just south of Mountain Meadows Reservoir. We're also working a road system going towards Little Dyer Mountain with equipment and crews coordinating with our counterparts in the West Zone. We also have resources that continue to work the fire's edge direct as possible through here, trying to prevent any further fire spread. So we are working direct and indirect options at the same time to make sure we have all potential opportunities. Given fire behavior, we're unsure of what this fire wants to do sometimes when the smoke lifts, so we're trying to have as many options as possible available. None of the structures on the east shore have been impacted. Same with Clear Creek and Westwood, so we're trying to keep fire out of that area. Additionally, we were able to open up 70 late this evening. That is not for anybody to go in there and take a look at the fire, just for traffic to be able to make access to areas as necessary. All in all, it's been productive these last few days. It's still a very difficult firefight. The weather, the fuels conditions can create extreme fire behavior, but they're in there doing everything they can.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I'd like to introduce to you our incident meteorologist, Rich Thompson.
All right, good evening, everybody. Again, Rich Thompson, incident meteorologist. Before I get into what we're expecting with the forecast this week, I want to take a minute just to explain exactly what an incident meteorologist is. Incident meteorologists, or IMET for short, are a specially trained cadre of meteorologists who work for the National Weather Service. Anytime there is a significant wildfire in the United States, usually an incident management team is called up to manage the fire. The IMET is dispatched by the National Weather Service to provide weather support to the incident management team. And we provide this support through doing weather briefings, forecast or the incident action plan, media interviews, and also community meetings like this. So we're basically there to provide weather information to the team in order to keep both the firefighters safe and the public safe. That's why we're here as IMETs. Now for the forecast this week, we're looking for a return of hot and dry conditions to the area. High pressure is going to be building over the western United States this week, and so we're looking for warmer temperatures through the week. In fact, by Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to see widespread temperatures in the 90s to even over 100 degrees here across the fire. As those temperatures increase, we're also going to see very low relative humidity, very little moisture in the atmosphere. We're going to see humidities dropping down into the low teens and even the single digits during the day, with very little, if any, recovery at night. So those two things are hot temperatures and low humidity are very bad for the fire environment. Those can lead to the fire wanting to be more active. On top of that, we're going to have gusty southwest winds each afternoon, about 15 to 20 miles per hour. So the combination of the high temperatures, low humidity, and those gusty winds in the afternoon are going to bring very elevated fire weather conditions to the Dixie Fire. Additionally, by the Thursday, Friday time frame, we're looking for the possibility of some monsoonal moisture to come up into the area. And that's just subtropical moisture that comes up from Mexico around the high pressure area. And as that moisture moves into the area, it's going to bring the chance of thunderstorms to the fire Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Now, these thunderstorms pose an additional threat to the firefighters in the fact that those thunderstorms can produce additional dry lightning strikes in and around the fire perimeter itself, and also produce some very gusty winds. So overall, we're looking for very significant fire weather conditions to develop across the area this week.
Thanks very much for that update there, Rich. Next up, I would like to introduce to you Plumas County Sheriff Todd Johns.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Plumas County Sheriff Todd Johns. I'd like to start off with some very good news tonight. At this time, all the reports that we received for unaccounted persons have been cleared, and everyone that was on that list has been safely located. So that's as of right now. My investigations unit, as well as my deputy staff and dispatchers, have done some great work in the last couple days, locating a total of 31 individuals that were unaccounted for. And I want to thank the public and the media support in getting the word out and assisting us in locating these individuals. Over the last couple of days, I've received some questions about the difference between a warning versus an order, so I just want to cover that real quick. So when a warning comes out from the sheriff's office, what that means is that you should start preparing to evacuate. That means you get your personal items together, collect your pets or have them ready to go, and make arrangements possibly for where you might want to stay. When a mandatory order comes out, that means it is time to go. That means you pack your things up, you pack your individual items that you deem to be the most essential, you get your pets, your medications, personal belongings, and that is time to leave. I also received a question of folks that want an individual timeline of when we are going to repopulate areas that are under a mandatory evacuation. As I've said numerous times, but I want to cover again, it's virtually impossible with the weather and the fire activity that we've had to give a timeline. I have consistently stated that it is a priority of mine to repopulate areas as quickly as possible by working with the incident team, CHP, Caltrans, PG&E, my staff. We have these meetings daily, sometimes many times a day, to discuss that, and just know that we will repopulate areas that are evacuated as quickly as possible. Yesterday, we issued 3 evacuation orders, and they were mandatory evacuation orders for zones 20, which is the Hart K Ranch, zone 29, Lone Rock, and zone 30, Antelope. For those of you that might be a little bit confused and are familiar with the area of the Genesee Valley, the Hart K Ranch includes the area only north of Genesee Valley, so the residences at the bottom of the Antelope Lake Road, and the Hart K Ranch itself would be included in Genesee Valley, but everything north of those residences would be considered the Hart K Ranch. And again, those orders are mandatory, so if you are still in that area, please leave immediately until we deem it safe for you to return. As the incident commander or the ops talked about earlier today, at 5 o'clock we were able to reopen Highway 70. I want to just cover that for a moment. We know that that is a thoroughfare that comes in and out of our county and that is quite popular to travel on. I just ask that you use it for essential travel only. Please understand that there's still fire personnel. There's rocks that are still potentially coming off of the hill. So when you're in that area, you need to slow way down. Be cautious of your surroundings because they could change at a moment's notice. But we felt that it was critically important to the county to get that thoroughfare open. Again, that area of Highway 70 is still under an evacuation warning. So if you have a residence there and you return to it, I want to make sure that you know that you still need to be cautious for fire activity in your area. And understand that any area outside of your residence is still considered to be under a mandatory evacuation. So that doesn't mean that you can walk out into the hills or the woods or the like of that. We know folks are anxious to get back in their neighborhoods and homes. Please use caution. There still need to be fire equipment and personnel in those areas. Many of our friends and neighbors have lost everything, and I know for those folks, the healing and recovery process will begin when they are able to see the damage that has been done to their property. Please know that we are working as quickly as we can to get you back to these closed evacuation areas. Our main priority is to get everybody back in safe, so please continue to bear with us as we work with Caltrans, CHP, CAL FIRE, and PG&E to ensure all hazards are removed prior to entry. My staff is establishing a system to provide a sheriff's escort for residents of impacted communities into their properties. For the latest information, I just ask that you watch our county Facebook page or go to plumas.us. And our intent is that prior to opening areas up to the public or a thoroughfare like Highway 89 through Greenville and Canyon Dam, is that we will actually escort folks into those areas so that they can view their property and then have a discussion with them as to what the next steps will be. So again, I hope to have that accomplished over the next couple of days, so just continue to be patient with us, please. Additionally, my dispatch center has been overwhelmed with calls related to this fire. Calls received range from people wanting to get back into evacuated areas as well as escorts and the like. Starting tomorrow afternoon, we'll be providing a phone number to call into for information that will be staffed during the daytime hours. Please look for the information about this number on our Facebook page. Please continue to call my dispatch center should you have an emergency or want to report a crime. However, if it's for an escort or anything else that's fire-related non-emergency, please look for the number that will be provided for tomorrow and start using that number. I know that standing here, I referenced Greenville a lot during these community meetings, but I absolutely realize that Belden, Rich Bar, Indian Falls, Canyon Dam, the West Shore, Chester, Warner Valley have all sustained home loss. Not to mention the fact that communities where no homes have been lost or were under extended evacuation, like Bucks Lake and Meadow Valley, who was almost out of their homes for 3 weeks, have had losses as well in the as far as perishable items, wages, rent, things like that. I want you to know that myself, my staff, and the county employees at the Emergency Operations Center will continue to work tirelessly to get any and all available assistance that we can for our communities affected by this tragedy. Our communities are strong, and we will get through this together. We need to continue to support each other, your neighbors, your family, and your friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Some great information there. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to California Interagency Incident Management Team 4, our Incident Commander, Rocky Opliger.
Again, good evening. I'm Rocky O'Player, Incident Commander for California Interagency Incident Management Team 4. Again, I want to welcome each and every one of you that have gone on logged into our virtual community meeting. You know, one of the questions that have come up is the number of firefighters we currently have on the fire and why don't we have more firefighters. So I want to give you an example of the difficulties we're facing in the Western United States. We currently in the Western United States have 96 uncontained, uncontrolled large fires. We have 25,225 firefighters deployed throughout the Western United States, of which we have 5,960 of those firefighters. If you were to take the number of large fires that are basically uncontained, divide that into the number of firefighters, if they were to divvy that up evenly, each fire would only get 263 firefighters. So that tells you that we are definitely the #1 priority in the country. We are the largest fire in the country. We take a look at aviation assets. We currently have 30 helicopters assigned to our fire. We have 9 large fires in California, and the second fire with the most helicopter aviation next to us is 7. We have 88 hand crews that are assigned. Those are 15 to 20 person plus people that go out and physically cut brush, do hotline, squirt water, try to go direct around the fires, and we have 88 of those crews. The next most on any fire in the Western United States is 18. We have 525 fire engines. The next most on any fire is 62. So we're very fortunate, and that's because of the relationships that our agency administrators, our cooperating agencies, as this is right now with CAL FIRE Team 3 and our team, has put those efforts and support that we're getting nationally and throughout California for the incident that is occurring. We take a look at our weather. There's some concerning things happening with the weather. We're seeing that starting tomorrow we'll be at 96 degree temperatures. On Thursday we're looking at 100 degree temperatures, and the following day potentially 101 degree temperatures. This is the environment that our firefighters are facing. We have extreme critical drought, as we're all aware of. You've heard it many times from fire managers. We're probably 6 to 8 weeks ahead of what normal fire season, even the severe, significant fire season we had in 2020. And we have angry fire on a landscape that makes it very difficult and to contain these fires and control these fires. Incredibly steep country that our firefighters are working in. So there was a question that says, well, why can't you just put the fire out, and why are you putting rings around the fire, far away from the fire? Well, really, the folks are doing every effort to go what we call go direct line construction and stay on the fire edge. The reason you see additional dozer lines out ahead of the fire and what we call contingency lines is if you take a look at the fire behavior that we're experiencing. Several days ago, we had a single day had a 15-mile run. Last year, we experienced a 26-mile run of a fire that went 218,000 acres in one burning period, essentially 7 hours. So when we take a look at that kind of fire behavior we're experiencing, and again, our #1 priority is always your safety, the public safety, but it's also the safety of our emergency responders. Our firefighters are law enforcement folks that are out there every single day. And so when we take a look at where we are with resources and the kind of fire, we are doing everything possible in collaboration with all our cooperators to try to do go direct, get as close to the fire as we can, and try to reach our containment objectives. And it is a slow process. We have a fire that's now burning on the landscape almost a month. But I'm real confident in the work that I've seen, the cooperation I've seen, just working together for one mission to try to reach our containment objectives. So I ask everyone, I know it's tough when you see this, you face this year after year, certainly in this area, seem that you can't escape the kind of conditions that you have faced here in Northern California and certainly in the Plumas-Lassen counties, along with Butte and now Tehama County. Our firefighters are doing every effort we can, and I'm going to tell you, as I stand here, just extremely proud of the men and women. And again, we've had resources from Hawaii to the South Pacific to Alaska to the East Coast. And those efforts continue as we have folks that basically time out. They're continuing to give us resources to keep the resources we need to eventually reach our containment objectives. So again, on behalf of California Team 4, CAL FIRE Team 3, all the cooperating land management agencies, our law enforcement agencies, and all of our cooperators, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief, for that management perspective. Next up, I would like to introduce to you the Plumas National Forest Supervisor, Chris Colton.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for making time to join us for information on the Dixie Fire, the east side this evening. Want to start off with responding to a couple of questions we received. Excuse me. Last week, or a couple nights ago, we received a question about our firefighters getting tested for COVID. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about that. So on this forest, we had the North Complex last year, and during the entire North Complex, we successfully put COVID mitigations in place that kept thousands of firefighters safe through masking, social distancing, testing, and that kind of stuff. You know, we all hoped we would be in a different place, and we thought we might be there earlier this season. Unfortunately, COVID is not in a different place, and excuse me. And so, unfortunately, we are seeing that new variant, that Delta variant, come out, and we've already seen some people test positive. And so, what we've done is gone back to some of those masking requirements within our fire camps. I know that's, you know, none of us want to be doing that, but that's kind of where we are. We got to control that spread. It also cuts down a lot of other stuff, you know, a lot of other colds and flu and that sort of thing. So we've got that. We are doing testing of both anybody who's showing symptoms, or anybody who just wants to get tested for kind of reassurance before they go home. And then finally, we've been offering vaccinations here in camp for our firefighters who want them. So, you know, we're really trying to be as aggressive as we can around this Delta variant for COVID. Hope that answers the question somebody had posted in there. I wanted to talk also about the forest closure. You heard the sheriff talk about Highway 70. So, you know, as a reminder, if you do have to, you know, if you're at your property or you live in there, we do still have forest closures out there, because those same hazardous conditions along the highway exist out there on the public lands as well. And so please, you know, we ask you to be careful and recognize those closures are there to keep people safe. There's a lot of hazards out there, and we need to make sure we get the fire contained, and then we can reevaluate as conditions allow. So thank you for that. You know, another question came up about how we fight fire, and I really want to clarify that every single agency, and you can look on the podium here, there are, I think, 6 or 7 different emblems up there. Every single agency, should be 6 or 7, involved in this fire fights fire the same. We go in and we hit it hard to put it out, and that's our commitment to every single firefighter that goes out there. That's our commitment to our communities and to everyone who's watching. We are there to put public safety and firefighter safety and community protection first and foremost in every situation. And then just one last kind of positive note. You heard about all the resources on this fire, and I want to talk a little bit about what they've done. We have over 229 miles of dozer line that was put in, 104 miles of roads that have been prepped to use for this fire, 18 miles of hand line, and that's those 20-person crews, 18 miles of line they've put in. And so finally, you know, we're seeing a lot of work. We're seeing some progress. That 1% of containment doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 4,820 acres. You know, 1% of a 482,000 acre fire is a little under 5,000 acres. That's quite an accomplishment. You know, and just wrapping up, I know that there are a lot of tensions out there. A lot of people are feeling pretty anxious. There's a lot of unknowns in the communities. We don't know where this fire is going to end and where it's going to land. Continues to challenge us. And one of the things we can do, we can't control some of that, but what we can control is how we're facing it and how we're dealing with each other and keeping that positive. We've had reports that some of our folks who happen to be wearing this uniform have had some hard questions out there. And I really want to recognize that right now, everybody in here, everybody in our communities is impacted exactly the same right now. We have folks in our agency who have lost homes. We have folks in our partners' agencies who have lost homes. And right now, I just ask that we continue to show some grace and recognize these are hard times for everybody. And let's just get through them together and keep that positive attitude and really support each other. Thank you, and have a safe evening.
Thank you for those words. We've had several questions coming from our social media pages, and my staff has been going through those, hopefully answering those as they come in. There has been a specific group of questions about the Janesville area, and so to try and encompass all of those questions in one go, I'm going to bring back our operations section chief, Kyle Jacobson.
Yes, so we did have several questions about the Janesville area, and I just wanted to point out that we are working closely with CAL FIRE, with Plumas National Forest, and we have developed a contingency group in the area. There's a fuel break that was put in Janesville, and we are in there working on opening up that fuel break, doing everything we can to have additional lines in between where the fire's at and Janesville. In addition to working this area around Lone Rock, we are also looking at putting contingency line in Wildcat Ridge to add another layer of security, as well as the fuel break around the community. So we're doing everything we can to secure the communities of Janesville and Susanville. Life and property are our number one priority, and we're working closely to make sure we have all of the resources we can protecting those communities. As we've been doing, we really try and protect that life and property. Another question that came up was an update on firing operations, and I just wanted to let everybody know that we aren't doing any large-scale firing operations in the East Zone. Right now, we are really focused on going direct, and we have a number of pieces of equipment in here. Just for example, just in this Lone Rock area, we have over 10 dozers that are working just this one little piece day and night, over 15 engines just in here, as well as hand crews. As we move down into the valley, we have another additional 8 dozers that continue to work north with additional engines and hand crews. So we are doing everything we can and putting all of our resources into place. Like I said, coordinating very closely to get additional resources from the Plumas National Forest and with CAL FIRE to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect life and property.
Thanks, Chief. That's coming towards the end of our briefing for tonight, our community meeting. Thank you all for joining us. Just as a quick reminder, tomorrow's meeting, same location, I believe we'll be streaming that too, will be given by CAL FIRE Team 3. Same time, 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, and they will be taking questions on the West Zone. Remember, West Zone will be every other day on the odd days, and the East Zone updates will be every other day on the even days. Look for all the links that we will be providing for everybody. Thank you from the Dixie Fire East Zone.
Alrighty, so that was definitely helpful. Lots of interesting information being put forward right there. I'll just plug my microphone back in. Alrighty, so in the live chat, you guys had a bunch of great questions. We had a few questions about fuel moisture and a few questions about beetle kill. So before we get back to actually looking at the Dixie Fire and all the other fires going on in Northern California, I can just show a couple of pretty interesting figures to illustrate those points that we were talking about throughout that live chat, throughout the CAL FIRE update. So this is a fuel moisture map. It basically tells you how much moisture is in your fuels. That might have been a easy way to describe it, but this is important because the drier the fuels are, the easier it is for fires to start, and then once those fires do start, the easier it is for them to spread. And you can see that it's especially around that Dixie Fire area and then throughout the Sierras where we see the driest fuels. And this is something that we've shown at the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory as well. We actually go up into the mountains, we collect fuel samples, we weigh them, we dry them out in an oven, and then we weigh them again, and it tells you how much moisture was originally in the plant. And this is just a chart that shows some of that data that we've had going back to 2009. And that green line right there shows the average fuel moisture values, and that blue line is where we are this season. So it is the lowest fuel moistures that we have ever recorded. So going into this season, we had a bad feeling that it was going to be a bad wildfire year. Now, the other place to see just an example of, I'll close that down so it goes a little faster. Other place to see just an example of how dry it is in California is the drought monitor. You can see about 85% of the state of California is in that bright red color, which is the extreme drought category. That burgundy color is the exceptional drought category. Main reason for that, this last winter we only received about 50% of our average rainfall, and the winter before that was pretty bad as well. So we've had 2 winters in a row where we didn't receive that much precipitation or snow in the Sierras, and because of that, our fuels are especially dry. Now, one other thing that somebody mentioned in the live chat that we'll just take a quick look at before we get back to the Dixie Fire is the tree mortality viewer, because this is something that has been playing a big role in all of the wildfires in the West over the last decade. You could actually put this up as one of the top factors that has led to the increase in wildfire, and especially in the Sierras and Northern California as well. You can see anywhere that I wish there was a legend on here, but basically anywhere that you see that yellow color to the orange color to the red color, that is where you have a large amount of tree mortality, and most of that is due to bark beetles. I briefly answered this question in the live chat, but in the past, these little beetles would try to burrow into the pine trees, and the pine trees would be able to repel them by producing sap. But when you get into a drought as bad as we've seen, this really started in that earlier drought we had in, I believe, 2014, 15, and 16. It weakened all the pine trees throughout the Sierras and other parts of Northern California, and because of that, they weren't able to produce as much sap to repel those bark beetles, and then the bark beetles basically burrowed into them and killed literally millions of trees throughout the Sierras. You can actually see some of this activity if you drive up into this area. We certainly saw it on the live cameras when we were looking at the Tamarack Fire. It looked like there was just mountains of dead trees. And I personally I've actually seen this more in the Rockies than the Sierras, where my grandparents live in Montana. About 5 years ago, it seems like every single tree around their entire house was just wiped out by bark beetles. So glad somebody brought that up in the chat, because that is a factor we haven't talked about yet over the last couple weeks, and that is one of the big factors that has been leading to the increase in wildfire danger. But without further ado, let's actually just get back to our fires. It's been a while since we did break away to watch that CAL FIRE update, so I'm interested to see how the satellite imagery has been changing. Where we left off, the northeastern section of the Dixie Fire was just taking off, and you can see, oh, wow. Sorry for the unprofessional noise right there, but that, I would say, is the largest pyrocumulus cloud that I think I can ever remember seeing on one of these satellite imagery cameras, and it's especially on that northeastern section there. It looks like we have another pyrocumulus up in the north here. Thanks again, Lucy, for the super chat again. I should be the one sending you some super chats for being such a great moderator. I've been loving the live chat over the last couple of days. It is amazing how much it actually helps me when you guys are posting questions or asking questions or posting questions about different towns and different areas to focus on, and then also posting questions just about wildfire in general, because it reminds me of some important things to talk about. For example, like the tree mortality or those fuel moistures that we hadn't looked at yet. So great job to all the moderators out there. The chat has certainly been great over the last couple days, so thanks for all the hard work you guys are doing as well. So just going back to the map here, you can see that pyrocumulus cloud up in the northern parts of the fire, but the big one is on that northeastern section. So let's actually see if we can let's update this and see if we can see the live update for where that hotspot actually is. Yeah, right there on the northeastern section of the fire. Yesterday, the most active part of the fire was that area just east of Lake Almanor, but you can see that part of the fire actually appears to have calmed down in the last 24 hours. Another great way to see where the fire is burning the most actively is by going to the natural color fire. If we click on that, see if it wants to load. So you'll be able to see earlier in the morning we didn't have that much activity, and then as we got later into the afternoon, that northeastern section has just absolutely blown up as the fire was able to break through that inversion. And that white streak, that is the pyrocumulus cloud that is coming off of the Dixie Fire. So like I said, one of the biggest pyrocumulus clouds that I think I have ever seen while looking at a wildfire. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out on this map is yesterday, I would say we weren't seeing as large of a hotspot, but pretty close on the eastern edge of Lake Almanor. It was right there in that section. So our big concern yesterday was those structures on the east shore of Lake Almanor and then the Westwood area as well, because we had that almost that bright red rectangle that you can now see on the northeastern section of the Dixie Fire. We had that going right up to those structures on the east shore of Lake Almanor and to the south of Westwood. So I'd say it's some great news to see that it's calmed down throughout this area over the last 24 hours. Now, I'm also very glad that we streamed that CAL FIRE update because and sorry, I'm trying to read the live chat as well. Still haven't mastered that ability to look at a map, talk about the map, and read the live chat at the same time. But again, what I was saying is our big concern yesterday was that hotspot was getting very close to Lake Almanor and Westwood, so it's good to see that there's less activity going on there right now. And it was also great to hear in that CAL FIRE update that they were able to get some great dozer lines in here. They have a lot of crews, a lot of resources, doing structure protection both on that east shore of Lake Almanor and to the south of Westwood. Sounded like they were feeling pretty confident in that area. And they also said that no structures have been destroyed there yet. So I would say that is some of the best news that has come out about the Dixie Fire in quite some time, because that was definitely a big concern yesterday, as those hotspots looked like it was going right up to both of those areas where we have large amount of structures. Now, where we do still have some concern, I would say, is on this west side. You can actually see it flare up right about there. You'll see a couple little pulses on the west side here. This is a spot of the fire that we didn't see that much activity on over the last week or two. It seemed like it had calmed down there. Be able to see it flare up a couple times here. But seeing more activity there right now than in the past, and it does look like we have some structures just north of there. But I do imagine they have a large amount of resources in there doing structural protection and getting some lines in to protect that little area right there. Now, what I think is going to be the top concern as we move forward over the next few days. So over the next few days, I'll just remind you that we're going to have some very challenging fire weather conditions. It's basically a giant ridge is going to be building over the entire west. So as you could hear in that CAL FIRE update, our temperatures as we get into Wednesday and Thursday will be into the mid-90s and in some cases even the triple digits, depending on where you are on the fire. And our relative humidity will be dropping down into the single digits and the low teens. So very hot, dry weather. And then in the afternoons, because of all that heat that's generated, you get those strong up canyon winds. And that is going to be producing southwesterly winds throughout the afternoon hours especially. So if you have southwesterly winds, you can actually see an example of what happens when you have southwesterly winds. Majority of your fire growth is to the northeast. That's why most of the growth on the Dixie Fire over the last week has been to the north and to the northeast. It's because our predominant wind direction on this is from the south and the southwest. And I'll pull up a graphic in a second that will actually be able to show you how those winds shift around in the afternoon and how that acts to spread wildfire forward. So again, expecting more growth to the northeastern section of this fire as we get into the middle of this next week. We're going to be in the mid-90s relative humidity in the single digits, and then those southwesterly winds picking up in the afternoons where we get some gusts up to 15 to 25 miles per hour that will act to continue to spread this fire farther to the north. So the reason I think that is such a large concern is because you can see how many structures are to the northeast of where the fire is currently burning the hottest. So again, there's that hot spot on that northeastern section of the fire. If we look at the pyrocumulus cloud one more time, just because, again, I think this is the largest pyrocumulus cloud I've personally seen from satellite imagery. Calm conditions throughout the morning, and then as we broke through that inversion in the afternoon, just a giant pyrocumulus coming off of that northeastern section. So again, the reason that's such a concern is because we're going to mostly have southwesterly winds combined with very hot, dry weather over the next few days, and we have a large amount of structures northeast of where the fire is burning the most actively. So with that, actually I should show exactly what all those towns are. I know sometimes I get too focused on the fire itself and I don't mention what towns I'm actually talking about. Looks like we have Buntingville, Janesville, Johnstonville, and Susanville are the towns to the northeast of where the fire is burning the most actively. Now there is some good news. The good news that comes in is, one, there's still quite a bit of distance between there. Two, I would say just based on this imagery, if that dark green color is where you have very dense, thick forests, it looks like there's almost a strip between the fire and places like Susanville, Johnstonville, Janesville, where there's not as much vegetation. So hopefully that would act to calm the fire down somewhat. But the other thing that should calm the fire down somewhat that apparently is already working in our favor, you get a little tip or an indication of it by looking at this map right here. It looks odd that there'd be a horseshoe like this, and you'd just expect the fire to continue to blow up in just a normal pattern like that northern section of the fire. But we have this horseshoe right here, and it's a perfect illustration of how current wildfires interact with past wildfires. So if we look at where that fire perimeter is, there's that horseshoe, and we turn on fire history, you can see that where that horseshoe is directly where the sheep fire was in 2020. So you can see that red line that indicates where the sheep fire was in 2020, and right where the Dixie Fire goes into where the sheep fire would have cleared out a lot of the fuels in this area, you can see that when there's less fuels in an area, the fire activity calms down. So the unfortunate thing is that the sheep fire didn't actually cover more of this area, because then we would have even more of these fuels removed, but I figure we'll take what we can get. And the great news on that is you can see that a large amount of those structures are directly behind the sheep fire. So it's almost like you have this protective barrier between a lot of those structures, like I believe that's Susanville up here, and where that fire is burning. And you can already see that the sheep fire is working to calm down the Dixie Fire. Now, the bad news is it looks like it's just kind of going around the sheep fire. Doesn't look like we're getting much help from the Moonlight Fire. Let's turn off fire activity so we can see that 2007 Moonlight Fire. Doesn't look like that one is really doing anything to calm down the Dixie Fire, as that's the part of the fire where we have the most activity right now. But again, 2007 was a while ago, so you do have your fuels growing back. But 2020 sheep fire, not a long time ago, so you're already seeing the great impact that's having on both tampering the fire spread on the northeastern section and also hopefully providing a protective boundary for future fire growth, and especially for that Susanville area. Susanville and Johnstonville, that looks like they're directly behind where that sheep fire is standing. Now, again, I think a concern that we could still say is it looks like where the Dixie Fire is burning the most actively right now is on that northeastern section of the fire. You can see the hot spots right there. We're looking at what I think is the largest pyrocumulus cloud that I've personally ever seen coming off right there. And you can see how the fire is just basically going around where the sheep fire had previously burned out in 2020. And because we have mostly southwesterly winds over the next few days, combined with those temperatures back into the mid 90s and relative humidity back into the low teens and single digits, this fire is going to continue to spread to the northeast. So we are going to have to keep a very close eye on all of these structures right here. Again, I believe those structures would be more Janesville and Buntingville. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on those, because you can see sheep fire doesn't go directly between the Dixie Fire and those structures right there. And we have mostly southwesterly winds, so that'll be a big thing we keep our eye on over the next couple of days. Now, the good news, I would say, is that there's still quite a bit of distance between there, and the other good news is if we look at the resources on the Dixie Fire, this is something that they were talking about in their update. There is a just massive amount of resources on this fire right now. We have 30 helicopters, 525 engines, 129 dozers, 135 water tenders, 5,813 personnel. Again, I don't know if I've ever seen a personnel number that large, and 97 crews on the Dixie Fire. So they will have hopefully enough time to really get some great lines in here, get some contingency lines as well, drop some retardant, and start doing some structure protection as well. So lots of resources on this fire that we've seen how effectively they can use those resources. Like in the Chester area, you can see how that fire wanted to just go right up to the shore of Lake Almanor, and somehow they were able to just keep that fire, for the most part, out of Chester and save all of those structures in there. Amazing work done by our firefighters in that area. Now, where we have had some challenges on the Dixie Fire is, again, in the Canyon Dam and the Greenville area. That's where the majority of the structures destroyed number is coming out of. You can see that number is at 433 structures destroyed, which we still have to check up on that one, because in yesterday's update and forecast, that number was at 627. So what I'm interested in, Jonathan Cox, this is a great account to follow on Twitter, as well as mine, of course. So Jonathan Cox, he usually posts the incident update reports from the Dixie Fire. And this one was 10 hours ago. So this is probably the report we were looking at last night. And yeah, that's very weird that the CAL FIRE website says 433 structures destroyed. Perhaps they're not counting the minor structures anymore. Last night they were counting the minor structures in their structures destroyed number. I believe we had 400 structures destroyed and 227 minor structures destroyed. And they were just combining those together to have this number be 627. But it looks like they're only counting the major structures now for that number. But you can see that did go up from last night if you were to then combine both of those together. Now, what I think is a big concern moving forward for the Dixie Fires, the fact that they did add 3,000 more structures to the structures threatened list. When we looked at this last night, it was about 13,000 structures threatened, and you can see that has jumped up to 16,000. I'd be interested to know where that increase in structures threatened came from. I imagine they're going to start counting some of the towns like Susanville and Janesville into that structures threatened list over the next couple of days, as we continue to see southwesterly winds pushing the most active part of the Dixie Fire farther to the north. So, been a while since I had showed the acreage, and actually been a while since we updated this. So let's see if they've updated this page. Nope, looks like it's last updated 8:57 a.m. We'll have to keep reloading this over the next hour, because they most likely will update it at some point here. So still at 489,000 acres for the Dixie Fire, 21% containment. And again, that is the second largest wildfire in the history of California. And you can see there they show that combined number still. So looks like we are up unfortunately, to 786 structures destroyed for the Dixie Fire. As always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by the Dixie Fire so far and is still currently being affected, whether you've had to evacuate or whether your structure was in this list. Again, thoughts and prayers go out to you. So going back to the Dixie Fire, again, 490,000 acres, but that was from this morning. So when they update this in about an hour, that we most likely will see that number increase. And then what I've been talking about doing for a while now is pulling up the, nope, that's not what we wanted, is pulling up the Wildfires Fire simulation model to really show why I keep saying that as those southwesterly winds pick up in the afternoon, we're going to see a large increase in growth to the northeast. So the Wildfires Fire model, while this is loading, it'll give me a nice little bit of time to explain exactly what this is. So at San Jose State, our fire weather research laboratory, we have two trucks. One has a giant radar on the back of it. One has a big LiDAR on the back of it. And we actually drive into wildfires and we point, we want to go active domain 3 so we can get the wind vectors and the fire area. So we actually drive into these fires and point the radar and the LiDAR at them, so we're able to collect a lot of data on the smoke plume, how the air is moving around the fire, and most importantly, how the wildfire is able to create its own weather. So then we take that data and we incorporate it into the Wildfires Fire computer model, which is basically, I might be a little biased when I say this, but I'd say the best wildfire simulation model in possibly the world. And it basically takes that data that we collect, combines it with fuel, moisture, topography, and the current fire perimeter to simulate where the fire growth is going to be moving forward. Now, final thing I'll say before I actually press play on this is that it is an experimental forecast only. Again, it doesn't take into account all the different strategies that CAL FIRE might be using. So it's always very interesting to watch these because sometimes it doesn't show very much growth at all, and then sometimes it just shows the fire absolutely exploding. So again, I haven't actually watched this most recent model update yet. We'll be watching this together for the first time, but just in case there is a massive amount of growth, I will remind you that it is just an experimental forecast. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water here before we look at this. Alrighty, and we are back. So first thing I want to point out is that you can see the clock on the bottom of the screen right here. That's saying about 5:45 in the morning, and you notice that all the winds are blowing down canyon. So the winds are blowing from the north, which is typical for the Dixie Fire area. During the early morning hours and nighttime hours, you get these winds blowing from the north down canyon, and then around 12 or 1 o'clock, you'll see these winds shift around. That's maybe the main thing that I love pointing out in this model. So as I press play, you can see still early morning. Most of those arrows are pointed down the canyon, especially down on the very southern edge of the fire. And then right around 12, 1 o'clock, those winds shift around. And then if you look at the northeastern section of the fire, that's where you'll start to see increased fire growth as you get into the afternoon hours. And that fire perimeter is combined with those southwesterly winds. Then you go back into the nighttime hours and early morning. Your winds shift back down canyon. This is now showing August 10th. At about 8 in the morning, you have your down canyon winds, especially on the southern edge of the fire. And then we're getting to 12, 1 o'clock. Winds start to shift around. Switches to a more southwesterly direction. And then you'll start to see more growth on the northern and northeastern edges of the fire. Looks like especially up here. So, and then the other thing I like to do on this model is pause it at the very end, and then go back to the beginning, and then to the end, to the beginning, to the end, and it shows where that fire is expecting to see more and more growth over the next 2 days. So it does, I'd say up in the north here, we're most likely going to continue to see a lot of growth up on the north here, because that is an area that there's just a large perimeter up there where it's actively burning. So it's going to be very hard to get a handle on all of that. Where I actually disagree with the model is if we zoom in to the east shore of Lake Almanor and the Westwood area. Again, it's great to see that there is a reservoir between the fire and Westwood. That is maybe one of the first things I should have pointed out when we were talking about Westwood. But if we go to the beginning and then go to the end, it does show a large amount of growth going to the east shore of Lake Almanor, but I would be a little hesitant to say, I actually don't think that's going to happen, because we've had a large amount of resources on that eastern shore of Lake Almanor working as hard as they can to work on structure protection. I was stumbling over my words there because somebody's saying you should check Fire Scanner on Twitter for an update. That's why I love having the live chat, because I used to do these videos where I just research for an hour or two and then have all my websites ready in order, and then I just present the information. And it was that night that when I was researching the wildfires, I saw one update that said fire appears to have gone back into Greenville. And then I finished my report, and then I looked at the live chat. I hadn't looked at it throughout the entire video, and person after person was talking about what was going on in Greenville. And then I went to Twitter, and there was just video after video of all the destruction that was going on in Greenville. So that is why you've maybe noticed that I've switched up how I do these videos. I used to try to make them very concise with dense information. Now it's more of an interactive experience where I'm researching and kind of figuring out what's going on with these wildfires at the same time as you guys, and you're also able to post some questions and give me some great advice for important places to look, important cameras to look at, what towns I should be worried about. So I would love to know what you guys think about this new format. I would say it's definitely better than the old format, as again, it's much more interactive and it's much more current. So I think it's actually more helpful as well, because the last thing you'd want to do with wildfire is to be presenting old information and in some cases giving people a false sense of security. So that video right there, Dixie Fire explodes off of Diamond Mountain Road in the old Moonlight Scar Monday evening. So lots of activity going on right there. We'll eventually check Alert Wildfire again, because we haven't been able to see that much activity on it yet, but perhaps there are some good cameras. Just continuing to scroll down here. So let's actually just go. Oh, wow. Weak fire tornado or strong fire whirl? I'd love to know what Neil replied. He's Neil Leroux. I've been lucky enough to work with him on occasion. He's one of the top wildfire researchers in the entire world. And what he says is, with these vortices, it's really useful, in my opinion, to place them in context of the overall plume and fire structure. Any idea of time and date without some way to quantify depth strengths, it's tough to classify. So that is quite a video. We can actually look at it right now. Wow. Yeah, that is quite a video. I believe that is coming out of the Dixie Fire. So let's see if he's responded again. No, it doesn't look like it. He's another great person to follow on Twitter as well. Again, Neil Leroux, one of the best or top wildfire researchers in the world. So CA Fire Scanner, that's what somebody suggested I should take a look at. And one thing I will say about fire tornadoes and fire whirls, most of the time it's just fire whirls. Again, big fire tornadoes get a lot of the press and coverage, but majority of the time it is just a fire whirl, and those actually aren't as unusual as you'd think. I've been to a few different fires in my life doing research with the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory, and it seems like almost every fire that I've been on, you end up seeing at least 5 fire whirls at some point. Again, those are on the much smaller scale. That one video we were just looking at certainly looked like it was on the larger scale. So let's actually look at CA Fire Scanner, because somebody mentioned this in the live chat for a good place to find some information. That might have been the video that they were talking about that I should show. Oh, so somebody said you can see the huge pyrocumulus from the East Quincy cam. So I'm going to go back over to Alert Wildfire, because that is something that we've been trying to see for quite some time. Because just going back, actually I'll load the map first, and while it's loading, I'll give my justification for why we've continued to come back to Alert Wildfire to try to see something. So East Quincy right there. Let's go 3 hours so we can see how it develops. While it's loading, I'll show it on the satellite imagery. Again, what I think is possibly the largest pyrocumulus cloud that I've ever seen come off of a wildfire. And I think it's the biggest one I've seen come off of the Dixie Fire. So lots of activity going on the northeastern section of the fire right there. Northern section of the Dixie Fire has been active as well. And more activity on the western edge than we have seen in previous days. But clearly the key spot to look out for is that northeastern section. Again, that's the part of the fire. We'll turn fire history off. That's the part of the fire that is starting, actually we'll turn it back on, is starting to curl around where the 2020 sheep fire burned last year. Removed a lot of these fuels. You can see that the Dixie Fire is almost just moving around where a lot of those fuels have been reduced because of the sheep fire in 2020. Seeing, I believe it's right about there that we're seeing that massive pyrocumulus cloud on the satellite imagery just blowing up over the last couple of hours once the fire was able to break through that inversion. Now, I've talked about this a couple times throughout the video, but I'll just mention it again. In the early morning hours, we were seeing relatively calm fire behavior. There was actually so much smoke that it was keeping our temperatures and our winds down, almost creating a cap over our fires. But then you can see as you get to the hotter, drier parts of the day, you break through that cap. And then after that is when you can start to see some extreme fire behavior. So I'm very glad somebody suggested that we look at the East Quincy camera, because if we press play on this, you can see exactly what I was just talking about. There's that smoke inversion in the morning, and the fire is not doing all that much. And then as you get into the afternoon, your temperatures get hotter, your relative humidity gets lower, it starts to break through there and push off a lot of smoke. Just a perfect example of what a pyrocumulus cloud looks like. So looking at that again, if you think about how much smoke is right there, sunlight would have a much harder time getting through there. There was one day where the forecast for the Dixie Fire was supposed to be about 90 degrees, and the smoke was so thick that our high temperature only got up to 70 degrees. So in some cases, smoke can actually be good on a fire. In some cases, it can be bad if you can't use your aircraft and the air quality is terrible. But you can see out right when we get into the afternoon, we break through that inversion and just a huge pyrocumulus cloud coming up right there. And it looks like even though we're getting into the overnight hours right now, when the fire should be calming down, still seeing a lot of activity right there. So I'm actually interested to see what the Dyer Mountain camera looks like as well. This is an area of the fire that we saw a lot of activity on yesterday. Again, I could actually show what this looked like yesterday because I posted it to my Twitter account. Again, I've never really used Twitter that much in the past, but I have recently started using it more because I think it's a way to just get out very concise information where I can just post a video of what the fire currently looks like and then maybe the 3 most important sentences to know about the fire. So I think once I changed the format I was doing for these YouTube updates to a much longer interactive format versus what to me was a concise format, that's why I've started to use Twitter a bit more, so that people who don't have as much time to be able to watch a live stream like this could go to my Twitter page just for the concise, most important, this is what you need to know. But again, this is what the Dire Mountain camera looked like yesterday. We had just a huge smoke plume coming off it. It was creating pyrocumulus cloud, and then the flames started coming over this hill right there. The video quality looks really poor right now. I think that's because I'm currently loading the Alert Wildfire site right now. So hopefully the live stream isn't glitching as well. But just going back there, you could see how much activity was happening on Dire Mountain yesterday. So I am interested to see what Dire Mountain looks like as of right now. So we'll come down here. And right there. Yeah, we'll go Dire Mountain 1. That was the camera we were looking at yesterday. We'll go to 3 hours. And you can see how much fuel is on. It's actually a perfect example of the different sides of a mountain and how, depending on what side of the mountain you're on, the fuels can be completely different. Usually you have your very heavy, dense fuels, I believe, on the north side of mountains. And then you have more grassy type fuels on the east side, because, especially in the northern hemisphere, because they get so much more sunlight during the day. But yeah, this camera is not really showing us much, so I'm just going to close it down because I think it's making the internet a bit slow. Sloat mountain camera is even better right now. Alright, so we'll keep that one up because we're going to want to keep uploading that. We'll just copy that link, put it over here, and then check out the Sloat mountain camera. Again, this is why I love doing the interactive, because if I just collected a bunch of websites and presented them, you end up missing out on when there's updates to what's actually going on. So Sloat Mountain right there. We'll go the last 3 hours. Oh yeah, that does look like it's a good view of that pyrocumulus cloud popping up. While that loads, I'll just show the numbers for our various fires because I haven't done this in a while. Let's load this again. Let's see if they've updated this yet. Nope, still last updated 8:57 this morning. Dixie Fire again at 490,000 acres, 21% contained. Large amount of evacuation orders are in place. You can see structures destroyed. That says 433 structures destroyed, but they're just counting major structures. If you combine major and minor structures destroyed together, you get 786 structures destroyed on the Dixie Fire. And you can see that it is now the second largest wildfire in the history of California. Now, somebody in the comments yesterday asked me if I think it is going to overtake the August complex. And this might just be the optimist in me saying, but I don't think the Dixie Fire is going to become the largest wildfire in the history of California. There is a lot of things going on with the August complex that allowed that to grow over 1 million acres. And the fact that the Dixie Fire is near such a large amount of structures, I think there are going to be, you can see how many resources we have on it right now. That's something I didn't show yet, but resources, we have 5,800 personnel on the Dixie Fire right now. That's much more than I believe we had on the August complex, so I don't think that we're going to take over that #1 largest wildfire spot. But again, that could just be the optimist in me. But one other thing I will say is I love reading all the comments you guys post on these videos, and I will eventually try to respond to most of them. I just haven't had a lot of time recently. I'm wrapping up my master's thesis at San Jose State, studying wildfire. I've also been doing the fill-in meteorology job at KSBW. maybe saw that video on my channel yesterday, and then also doing these wildfire videos. But I do read all the comments you guys post, and some of the questions you guys ask and comments you guys make, especially with some of the local intel from people actually on the ground. I incorporate all of that information you guys give me into these reports. So I almost kind of view these videos as a team effort. One, from the comments you guys post about the conditions in your area. Then two, the questions you guys ask in the live chat, the live camera suggestions that you post in the live chat, and then also questions about wildfire in general. So looks like the sloped mountain camera has loaded, so let's check it out. Again, early in the morning we had that thick smoke inversion, so that was keeping our fire activity down. But then as we get into the afternoon, you see it break through there. Oh yeah, this is a better shot of it. Lots of activity going on right there, and even into the nighttime hours. The camera will most likely switch to night vision in a second, but you can see, we'll just watch that again because that's one of what I would say is one of the craziest videos we've seen on the Dixie Fire since it began. As it almost reminds me of boiling water a little bit. You have that smoke inversion, and then it's able to just break through, and then once it breaks through, that's where you start to see much more extreme fire behavior. So great recommendation on that live camera. So we will look at the fire weather forecast for the Dixie Fire again, because that's going to have some big impacts on the wildfire as we move forward. See, a couple of messages have been deleted in the live chat. Big thank you to all my moderators out there keeping the live chat useful and informative. So I didn't see what those comments originally were, but thanks again for keeping everything clean and good. But I haven't mentioned this barely at all in the video because of the poll I did this morning where 88% of you said you're mainly just focused about the Dixie Fire, but we do have a number of other large wildfires going on. We have the Mcfarland Fire, the Monument Fire, the River Complex, and the Antelope Fire. Looks like Antelope, River Complex, and Monument seeing a lot of activity throughout the later parts of the day. In the early morning hours, we had that thick smoke inversion, but a couple pyrocumulus clouds popping up over the last couple of hours, especially on Antelope, and it looks like River Complex as well. So haven't mentioned these numbers yet, so we will just take a quick look at them. I'll load it just because it was about 2 hours ago that I last loaded this page. The Mcfarland Fire is up to 33,000 acres, and it's at 33% containment. The Monument Fire is at 53,000 acres and 3% containment. Seen a lot of growth on that one over the last couple days. The Antelope Fire is at 42,000 acres and 24% containment. And the River Fire is at 27,000 acres with 5% containment. So those are the other wildfires going on in Northern California. Again, I haven't been spending as much time on those today because there's some very active behavior going on the Dixie Fire as of right now, and that is the one that is threatening the largest amount of structures. And what you guys responded to on the post I did this morning, that I believe almost 90% of you are mostly just focused on the Dixie. So again, we'll just once again focus on the Dixie. So let's actually see that hotspot. I want to see if it's calmed down at all as we've transitioned to night. You can see some of that activity on the north there, but that bright red spot, and it doesn't look like it's starting to calm down yet. It should start to calm down a little bit as we get into the overnight hours. Our temperatures come down, our relative humidity slightly comes up, but it looks like still seeing a large amount of activity right on that northeastern section there. So again, I think reason that one is, oh, it looks like somebody is saying something in the live chat, trying to read. Oh, school fire. So that's interesting. I actually don't even know where the school fire is. So glad somebody posted that. Hopefully that was what somebody... school fire, maybe not in California. That seems like maybe what the live chat is saying. School fire. and not seeing any updates. I'll look into that for future videos though, but again, if that is outside of California, I do mostly just focus on California. One, because the Dixie Fire, we are seeing so much activity on it right now, and there is, I believe, about 16,000 structures that are currently threatened. And two, I'm a bit biased because I have lived in California my entire life, and I plan on living in California my entire life as well. And with so many fires going on in California, there's only so much I can include in each update. We have the Dixie Fire, Mcfarland, Monument, River Complex, and Antelope. So I know I have had people asking me to cover the Greece fires, the Canadian fires, the Russian fires, but I have to prioritize when it comes to wildfire season, and you can see why the Dixie Fire is such a high priority right now, as we are still seeing a large amount of activity on it. Now, I do want to make a little forecast for how that activity is going to be over the next few days. And I usually try to focus on silver linings and be optimistic, but when it comes to the fire weather forecast, we have some very challenging conditions coming in. Over the last couple of days, our temperatures were somewhat moderated because we had this low pressure system going through Washington that brought our temperatures down a few degrees. We were just back into the 80s. But as that low pressure system continues to leave, you can see this massive ridge is going to be developing over the west, and our temperatures are going to be rising up as that ridge develops itself. So tomorrow afternoon, our temperatures, let's just kind of click a point where we're seeing a lot of fire activity on it. Temperatures into the low 90s as we get into Wednesday. Our temperatures get into the mid 90s. Thursday, into the mid 90s again. Friday, back into the 80s. So it looks like slight cooling on Friday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, our temperatures are back into the mid 90s. Our relative humidity is going to be in the low teens to the single digits. And we're also going to be seeing those strong southwesterly wind gusts in the afternoon hours. Again, you can't see it that much on Tuesday. Let's see if Thursday has stronger winds. No, actually it looks like the winds aren't going to be, they're at least not as bad as they were during that red flag warning where we had gusts up to 35 miles per hour. But it does look like we consistently have 15 to 20 mile per hour winds. And again, mostly from the southwest. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is we're returning to more critical fire weather conditions. Temperatures up into the mid 90s. Very dry air and moderate wind gusts, I would put it that way. 15 to 20 miles per hour. And you notice mostly from the southwest. Now, the reason that direction is so important, I'll just close this one just because I think the slope mountain camera definitely the one. So right there, I think that's probably a good way to show it. You can see where most of those hotspots are on the Dixie Fire. It's been on the northern, but especially the northeastern sections of the fire. The main reason for that is because our predominant wind direction, and especially during the afternoons, is from the southwest. So just kind of makes sense that if the winds keep pushing the fire forward, the majority of your growth will be on the northeast. So that kind of explains what is one of my top concerns moving forward with the Dixie Fire, is that area of the fire where we're seeing the most activity right now, that hot spot right there. If we want to see it another way, it was moderate this morning, but then you're going to see that northeastern section absolutely blow up this afternoon with one of the largest pyrocumulus clouds I think we've seen on the satellite imagery. Another way to view how hot that northeastern section is by looking at this imagery where you see it just turn bright orange this afternoon and into, really, as I'm recording this live stream, a lot of activity right there. And if that wasn't enough, we can look at it one final way. You can see how it was moderate in the early morning hours, and then as we got to the hotter, drier, windier parts of the day, all factors that are going to be picking up over the next couple days, you can see how that activity has picked up with the large pyrocumulus clouds coming off of the Dixie Fire as of right now. So moving forward into the forecast, we're going to be seeing a lot of southwesterly winds, so that's going to act to continue to push this fire farther to the northeast. Now, there is some good news in this area. If we go back to the fire perimeter, you can see that there's a horseshoe right here, and the reason for that is the sheep fire burned in that area in 2020, so it removed a lot of these fuels. With less fuel, you can basically see how that fire just stops in its tracks. But the bad news is that the sheep fire, well, good news and bad news. The good news is the sheep fire looks like it is between the fire and cities like Susanville and Johnstonville. It looks like they have that protective boundary where the fuels have been reduced, and you can see how that actually helps calm the fire down when those fuels have been reduced. But the bad news is that we don't have that protective boundary on the northeastern section of the fire where it seems to be burning the hottest, as we just saw 5 different ways. And it's basically just open ground to areas like Janesville and Buntingville. Now, big thing I will say is that even though you don't have that protection from the sheep fire, you do have protection from 5,800 personnel working, some cases around the clock, to get some use the 129 dozers and 30 helicopters and all these over 500 engines to get some original lines in, some contingency lines, then another line, and then doing structure protection as well. So lots of resources, and there's still quite a ways to go. But I think that is the spot that I'm going to be watching very closely over the next few days. Now, the spot that we were watching the closest yesterday was the east shore of Lake Almanor and Westwood. That giant red spot that we see on the northeastern section of the fire, that's almost what it looked like. I'd say not as bad, but it's almost what it looked like right to the east of Lake Almanor and south of Westwood yesterday. That was a big concern because it looked like that hotspot was going right up to the structures and right up to the southern edge of Westwood. So that was the top spot we were talking about yesterday. The good news is it looks like that hotspot has calmed down over the last 24 hours. And we also had some good news coming out of the... looks like there's some trolls in the chat. I haven't been looking at it, and maybe it's a good thing I haven't been looking at it because it would have just been distracting me. Great job, moderators. You guys are crushing it right now. So, again, going back to the map here, much less heat activity in this area than we were seeing yesterday. You know, we could actually, let's see, we could actually see what that looked like yesterday. If I go here and we go back to Firefox, and we go to YouTube, because I actually used this map in my forecast yesterday, so we'll be able to see what it actually looked like. And I think that I normally wouldn't take this time to go on a tangent, but I think it does perfectly illustrate the point I'm trying to make right now. So we'll just fast forward. This was my report at KSBW yesterday. So right there is maybe a good place to pause. That's what that hotspot looked like yesterday. So that was the key area of concern. As you can see, it looked like it was going right up to the southern edge of Westwood, and it looked like it was going right up to that eastern shore of Lake Almanor. So keep that image in mind, and then, keep that image in mind, and then be able to see what it looks like right now. So much, much better conditions right now than we were looking 24 hours ago in this area, and that is great news because we have a large amount of structures right there. Now, the other good news, as we heard in the CAL FIRE update, is as we heard in the CAL FIRE update, is it sounds like they had a large amount of resources, especially on the southern edge of Westwood and in the Lake Almanor area, working as hard as they could to put in some structure protection, get some dozer lines in there, some other lines, and it sounded like they're feeling pretty confident in those areas, which is, I would say, some great news, as we were so worried about those areas yesterday. But again, coming back here, area to be concerned about as we go forward is that northeastern section, as it's going to try to just keep moving farther and farther to the northeast into places like Janesville and Buntingville. So that's going to be, again, still some distance between there, but that's going to be a spot we watch closely over the next couple of days. Now, let's see. Oh, actually, I think this was a while ago, but I think I remember somebody mentioning to check out the Indian Ridge cam. And we haven't looked at that one in a while, so I would be interested to see what that looks like. Oh, wow. Yeah, we'll load this up and see what that looks like. In the meantime, I'll take a quick sip of water. Almost looks like we have a spot fire down on the southern edge right here. You can see, if you look closely, you can see some smoke coming up right there. So while the rest of this video loads, that could be a good thing to talk about. If you look in here, you notice how we get some hot spots out ahead of the fire, or the major blaze, or where you see that fire perimeter. That's a perfect example of a spot fire. What basically happens is when you have a giant smoke plume like we're seeing over the last few hours, especially on that northeastern section, you can think about how many burning embers, burning twigs are in that smoke plume, and you can see how the wind blows it. So as the wind blows that smoke plume, some of those burning embers drop down, and we have record dry fuels in this area, so there's about a 90 to 100% chance of ignition rate with those burning embers as they come to the ground, and then it starts their own little fires, which are called spot fires, and that's where you can see a large amount of growth. And that's what I would say is actually the biggest factor on the Dixie Fire throughout its lifetime, especially on this northern edge here. I'll remind you that it wasn't all that long ago that the Dixie Fire was looking great. It basically looked like it was wrapped up. I didn't even do updates for 2 days in a row because nothing had changed for the previous 4 days, and it sounded like they just had great control over the entire thing. We had a huge firing operation that went from Lake Almanor all the way to this western edge of the fire, just basically cleared out all of the fuels in a giant strip to protect that northern section right there. You can actually see where that firing operation was. Where you see that line right there, you can imagine that line went around the northern edge of the fire, had cleared out an entire strip of fuels, and then there was one day as it got hotter, drier, and windier. Perfect example of how wildfire and weather interacts. We had an unburned pocket of fuels just flare back up in here. The smoke plume was able to carry some of those burning embers over that fire line, over that containment line, over where the fuels had been cleared out, started a spot fire up here, and then it grew 15 miles in one day. So I would say if you have to blame the massive amount of growth that we're seeing on the Dixie Fire, I would blame it on the wind, because it looked like we had this thing controlled, and then the wind was what caused those spot fires. And you can see the wind, after it caused those spot fires, just continued to push it farther and farther to the north, farther and farther to the northeast. And wind, I think, will continue to be the biggest factor as well, combined with those dry fuels too, because you need those dry fuels for those spot fires to be able to catch in the first place. But with those strong southwesterly winds over the next couple of days, key spot we're going to have to look at is that northeastern section where we're seeing the most activity right now. That massive smoke plume coming off of it, and the fact that we'll have southwesterly winds while we have temperatures in the mid 90s with relative humidity in the single digits, we'll have to keep a very close eye on that one. So now let's check out the Indian Ridge cam. It looks like it's loaded. There, that's how we got on the spot fire tangent about 3 minutes ago. You can see one of those little spot fires right there smoldering, or it could actually be a firing operation as well, but to me, I would imagine that's a spot fire. I'm not sure they would do a firing operation during the most difficult part of the day to do a firing operation. But yeah, great recommendation for a camera to look at. One thing I noticed is how strong the winds appear to be. You could see how the winds were blowing the smoke down this mountain and then up this mountain. So you think that's where the winds and the topography align. So that's where you'd expect to see the most fire growth, because fires like to burn uphill and they like to burn with the wind, and that is where you see the most fire growth. And it's also interesting to see that it's picked up during what seems to be the nighttime hours. Again, it's a little hard to see what was going on there earlier in the day because there's so much smoke. But once it switches to night vision, you can see that huge smoke plume popping up right there and the large amount of fire activity happening. Again, this is from the Indian Ridge camera that we're viewing that. And then just one other camera that we're seeing a lot of activity on. This was the Sloat Mountain camera. Relatively calm conditions earlier in the day when we had that great smoke inversion. And then you can see how once it punched through, then we started to see some more extreme fire activity. Big thing I always say when we're looking at plumes like this is with all that rising air, something has to take its place because you can't just have a vacuum on the surface. So as you get all that rising air, that's when you start to get erratic, gusty winds at the surface, and that's where the situation can get dangerous and the fire can just start to spread erratically in all kinds of different directions. So just going to take one more quick sip of water. I'm still interested to see if this one has been updated yet. Usually they update this page at 7. Looks like still 8:57 a.m. So that one hasn't been updated yet. I wonder if the Dixie Fire has its own InciWeb. So again, that's the two places I always go for wildfire information. Cal Fire and InciWeb. Let's see, looks like Dixie Fire does. No, it says Evans. Dixie Fire. Oh, interesting. So they have it at 482,000 acres. This one shows 489,000 acres. To explain that, let's go on back to Twitter here. And Zeke Lunder, he's another great person to follow on Twitter. I remember him posting, can't actually see where his post was, but he posted something about the fact that they had a new infrared flight over the fire. So how I would justify the fact that the number of acres has gone down, I believe. Yeah, so somebody said, yes, InciWeb is updated. Yeah, it looks like it was updated 21 minutes ago. So we should start to see that updated pretty soon. So again, what I was trying to say is it sounded weird looking at that Twitter account because I remembered him saying that there was another infrared flight this afternoon. So I wonder if they remapped the perimeter and found out that it was actually smaller than they'd originally assumed. So looks like, again, we're at 482,000 acres as of right now, 22% containment. Let's see if this could be interesting to read. An update. Yeah, let's check this out. So let's go to the west zone first. It says smoke was very slow to thin today, hampering air operations. That's the downside of smoke, where the smoke is good is when it keeps your temperatures and your winds down. It says fire behavior consisted of wind-driven surface fire, isolated torching, that's when a tree just bursts into flames, and spotting, that's what we just spent about 5 minutes describing. It's when the winds pick up burning ember, start new little fires outside of the fire perimeter due to critically low fuel moisture. So you can think if one of those burning embers gets dropped. Oh, interesting. Catherine's showing footage of cameras wrapped in embers. I'd love to know what camera that is so we could try to look at it as well. Yeah, so the reason fuel moisture is so important, you think about if you have one of those burning embers dropping down into wet grass, it's not a good chance that it's going to ignite a new fire. But if it drops down into critically low fuel moisture, makes it much more likely for that fire to start. Hot temperatures are forecasted for this week with southwest winds. That's what we've been talking about throughout the entire course of this video. Critical fire weather conditions coming in with those southwest winds as well. That's why we're expecting to see the majority of growth on the Dixie Fire to continue to be to the northern and northeastern sections of this fire, as those mid-90 temperatures are combined with low fuel moistures and spread to the northeast. So let's see if somebody posted where that link is. Dire Mountain 2 camera. All right, let's check it out. That's why I love having the live stream here with the live chat, because you guys are great at finding the best information. So let's check that out. Let's go 3 hours. And we'll let that load. It usually takes a second. While that's loading, I just want to finish reading the Dixie Fire update. Fire crews are aggressively building direct and indirect lines and utilizing control lines from previous fires. Resources. So utilizing control lines from previous fires. So to understand that, we could go on back to the fire perimeter, and you can see how it stops right when it gets to the 2020 sheep fire. Two reasons that could be the case. One reason, the sheep fire cleared out a lot of these fuels, so there's just not as much fuel for the Dixie Fire to continue to grow. The other reason is if they stop the 2020 sheep fire right here, that might be exactly where all their containment lines are. So they might just be able to, or not might, they are able to, because they're saying that in their update, they're able to reuse those previous containment lines. So again, it's not good to have wildfires, but it does help you when it comes to future wildfire seasons, because it means a lot of the fuels are removed and you also have some containment lines already put in place. So we'll continue in here. Resources will continue to provide structure protection in communities at risk. We definitely heard that was the case on the east shore of Lake Almanor and the southern area of Westwood, where it sounded like they had a large amount of resources in those areas working on structure protection, working on getting some good lines in. And I'm just gonna, I think I've seen this one person's comments get, oh, interesting. Okay, so just coming back here, let's look and see if that camera loaded yet. Looks like there's a person down there. All right, so we're watching this together for the first time. Yeah, it looks like there's some people if you look closely. Other thing I noticed is different fuels going on than in some of our other areas. Looks like it's more almost like, at least from that view, it looked like around the camera it was more chaparral type fuels. But we do have a large amount of trees down here. Yeah, so it looks like there's certainly some fire activity going on in this camera. I'd be interested to know if that's a firing operation now that we are getting into the more nighttime hours. This is when they could start to do firing operations. But again, I think the craziest shot that we've seen so far is from the Slope Mountain camera, where you just see this pyrocumulus cloud take off over the last couple of hours. Yeah, that's a good line. Fight fire with fire. That is certainly what we do when you're doing firing operations like that. It's where you clear out some of those fuels, and then by the time the fire gets there, less fuels, and then it dies. Now, where that doesn't work is when you have an amazing firing operation around the entire northern edge of the fire, and then times are just the fuels are just so critically dry and the winds are so gusty that it's able to actually carry embers and drop them over the firing operation. But certainly helping us to have that 2020 sheep fire on that northern section up there. So let's go back. I want to finish reading that update. Evacuation warnings and evacuation orders are constantly changing. Please see below for information affecting your area. I believe I have a number of different links in the description of this this video. I don't have the InsuWeb Dixie Fire one, but again, you can just find this by going to insuweb.com and then typing in Dixie Fire. So now, this is, I think, one of the top things that I'm interested in reading, the east zone of the Dixie Fire update, because it's the east zone where we've seen the massive pyrocumulus cloud popping off over the last 3 hours at this point. I believe I started, maybe two and a half hours at this point since we started to see the activity on this east zone really start to pick up. So I'm interested to see what they have to say was driving that extreme fire behavior. So fire became active. That's a good way to put it. Certainly looked like it was active as it was ventilated by southwest wind gusts up to 20 miles per hour in the China Gulch topography. So you think about that. How I always think about that is, one, you have those southwest winds because in this area, as we saw on the Wharf S-Fire simulation model, those winds shift around and blow from the southwest during the early morning hours. But where you have a canyon or a gulch or a drainage, how I always think of that is if you have a hose and you're pouring out water and then you put your thumb over the end of the hose, it squirts out a lot faster. And the same thing happens to winds in a canyon. It almost gets squeezed. There's less area for it to go through. So those winds start to pick up. And then that's where you can start to see some of your most extreme fire behavior, some of the worst wildfire disasters in history when it comes to lives lost or structures lost are in canyons because those winds can pick up radically and lead to some very rapid rate of spread. So coming back here in the China Gulch topography and slowed its progression in the Moonlight Fire burn scar. So that's interesting. We were kind of talking badly about the Moonlight Fire burn scar earlier because we were seeing all that activity right over the Moonlight Fire. But according to their report, it sounds like it has been at least helping in some way. Again, if we want to see that better, you can see Moonlight's right there. And fire activity, we've seen a large amount in the Moonlight Fire. So what we were talking about is it seems like 2007 was too long ago that some of those fuels have grown back, but sounds like it has been helping at least a little bit where the continuity of fuels decrease. So perhaps by that they mean that it's not just continuous fuels, it's more patchy. So where those fuels are, you can still get some very active fire growth, but it's not just a non-stop area of fuels where the fire can just burn through all at once. Now, continuing here, crews continued to fight fire aggressively, constructed direct and indirect line to secure the fire perimeter, including dozer lines. Structure preparation continued in the Hamilton Mountain and Dyer Mountain areas. So, I'd say that's some pretty good news. Nothing too drastic in their update right there. Sounds like they have lots of resources on the fire. They're getting some help from the various burn scars throughout the region. And situation looking better, especially in the Lake Almanor area than it was yesterday. I think that's, again, the part that I keep driving home right now is yesterday we had that giant hotspot bumping right up to those structures on the east shore of Lake Almanor and right up to the southern edge of Westwood. but we've had reduced fire activity right there throughout the day today. And based on that CAL FIRE update, it sounds like no structures were destroyed in either of those areas, and they have a large amount of resources continually working on structure protection to make sure that no structures are destroyed there in the future. But again, key concern on this fire as we move forward, again, I am surprised that they said the Moonlight Fire burn scar is helping, because you can see what a large hotspot that is directly over the Moonlight Fire. And then you can also see, you zoom in to where that activity is happening, that's where we had that giant pyrocumulus cloud popping up earlier today. One of the biggest ones we've seen. If we actually want to see that, we can go back here and actually watch that pyrocumulus cloud as it came in this afternoon. Alrighty, so when it comes to the Dixie Fire, I'd say the key area that we're going to be watching over the next few days is this northeastern section right here. You can see that we have been getting some great help from the Sheep Fire, which burned in 2020. You can see how the fire basically stopped right as it gets to that burn scar. It also sounds like we're able to reuse some of those containment lines in the area. But you can see how it's now just wrapping around the Sheep Fire, and where we have a large amount of structures just to the northeast. Now, I focused on the fact that those structures are to the northeast because we're mostly going to be having southwesterly winds throughout the next few days, combined with some temperatures in the mid-90s, some relative humidity in the single digits. So I hate to say it, but we are going to have some very challenging conditions over the next few days, and especially on this northeastern section, which will be fanned by those southwesterly winds. Now again, reason I think that's the big concern is you can see all those structures up there. We have Susanville, Johnstonville, Janesville, Buntingville. The good news for Susanville and Johnstonville is it looks like you guys get some protection from the 2020 Sheep Fire, but for Janesville and Buntingville, it looks like it's basically just fuel between there. Again, there is still a large amount of distance to cover, and we have 5,800 personnel on this fire. So they already said they're repositioning some resources to this area to work on dozer lines, structure protection already. But with those southwesterly winds and those very critical conditions coming in over the next few days, we are going to have to watch that closely, because we have seen what the Dixie Fire can do. Remember, it was in one day, this fire grew 15 miles on that northern section there. So we are going to keep a close eye on it. Again, I don't think the fire weather forecast is as bad as that day we had 15 miles of growth over here. That was when we had that red flag warning and we had some wind gusts up to 35 to 40 miles per hour. Looks like the winds won't be as strong as that, but temperatures will be hot and relative humidity will be low. So somebody just asked, what is the distance? So if you look down there at the bottom left of the screen, it shows what 3 miles is. So if you were to try to stack those on top of each other, I would imagine those structures are about 10 miles away from where we're seeing some activity. Let's see where the most recent activity actually is. Yeah, it looks like it's pretty close to that previous fire perimeter. Looks like it's about 8 to 10 miles, I would say. So still a ways to go. We have a lot of resources up here actively working to get in some good lines and structure protection, but with southwesterly winds coming in, we'll certainly keep a close eye on that. So we'll update this one more time to see if they finally updated it. So some good news, the acreage burned on the Dixie Fire actually went down 7,000 acres since yesterday. I believe, I don't actually have the exact reason for this, but I believe it's because they had a new infrared flight that was able to get a more accurate mapping of the fire, and they reduced that acreage burned to 482,000 acres. But again, the bad news on that is we are still the second largest wildfire in the history of California. Let's see if they've updated that. and almost 800 structures have now been destroyed with the Dixie Fire. We did gain 1% of containment, so I guess that's something right there. But again, there's a large amount of evacuation orders in place, and what CAL FIRE said is that those are rapidly changing, so you always have to stay updated. I put a lot of the links for that in the description. You can find that also by going to CAL FIRE or ncweb.com. So looking at the structures destroyed number, looks like that has been updated since the last time we looked at it. Unfortunately, looks like we're up to 873 structures destroyed. I would say that the increase in that number, if I had to make I don't want to say a guess because it's an educated guess. If I had to make an educated guess on why we've seen that number rise up as much as it has in the last couple of days, it's because we've been having the damage assessment teams come back from areas like Greenville and Canyon Dam, which burned more than a couple of days ago. So I don't imagine that large increase in structures destroyed over the last 24 hours was actually new structures being destroyed in the last 24 hours. I believe it's just the damage assessment teams finalizing their results and those results being included in the tally from what had previously burned in Greensville and Canyon Dam. But again, hey, we actually got more personnel, so I'm glad that this website updated before I wrap this up. But this got updated as well, so that's some good news. 30 helicopters, 476 engines, 174 dozers, 163 water tenders, almost 6,000 personnel, which I don't think I've ever seen on a fire. That is a lot of personnel, and 75 crews. Now, the big thing to keep in mind for the Dixie Fire as we move forward, not sure why it always brings me down in that area around Florida, but big thing to think about for the Dixie Fire moving forward is looking at the fire weather forecast for Tuesday afternoon. We're going to have slightly warmer temperatures getting up to 94, actually much warmer temperatures, back into the mid 90s. Wednesday, it looks like, just loading, looks like we're in the mid 90s again. And then on Thursday, we're even warmer than that, getting up into the high 90s. So very challenging temperature-wise. That's also going to be very challenging humidity-wise, where it drops into the single digits. The drier your air is, the drier the fuels get, and the faster the fire is able to spread, and the more likely it is for spot fires to happen. And then on top of that, we're also going to consistently see those southwest winds in the afternoon hours, where we do get some gusts up to 15, 20 miles per hour. Right there you can see it, 15 to 20 mile per hour gusts in the afternoons. So yeah, I can see the live chat. Dang, holy crud, oh god. Yeah, it is going to be some challenging conditions going forward, especially temperature and humidity wise. Being in the mid 90s with single digit humidity, that's about as bad as you're going to see it. Where I'd say it's some good news is, maybe not still good news, because 15 to 20 mile per hour winds and from the southwest is certainly not what you'd like to see. You'd like to see it at 0 miles per hour and blowing in a direction that's back into the fire, not into where we have more structures. But that's at least better than when we had that red flag warning over us and we had the 35 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts. Can you show the footage of the dozers working? I am not sure where I would find that footage. I do have some personal footage myself from a fire that I went to in Napa for research with the Fire Weather Research Laboratory, but that fire was last year, so it would be not exactly relevant footage. We could take that time to check out any recent information on Twitter though, because there might be some footage like that on here. Still hunting for info on what is blowing up in East Zone. That's basically what we've been talking about throughout this entire video. We'll edit as info comes in. Fire show starting this AM Gotcha. You can see that big pyrocumulus cloud there. This was a video coming out of the Dixie Fire. Lots of activity. You can see how high those flame lengths are too. Think about how tall those trees are. And right there you see some torching. That's where one tree just bursts into flames. So certainly a lot of activity going on in the Dixie Fire. You could put it that way. There is a perfect example of what we've been talking about. How right when the Dixie Fire goes up to where the sheep fire burned in 2020, it just stops it in its tracks. That shows how effective it is when the fuels are removed from an area. Certainly seeing that come into play, but unfortunately that sheep fire doesn't cover that whole area between the Dixie Fire and where we have a large amount of structures. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on areas like Janesville and Buntingville. Looks like Susanville and Johnstonville do have that protection from the sheep fire. So I'll close this out. And I think I'm going to try to save my voice a bit for tomorrow. So I might just try to wrap it up right here. I'll just do a quick summary of, first I'll just do the quick numbers on the other fires, and then I'll end with just a 10-minute everything you need to know about the Dixie Fire. So Mcfarland Fire, 33,000 acres, 33% containment. Monument Fire, updated again. Monument Fire is 53,000 acres with 3% containment. Antelope Fire is 42,000 acres with 24% containment. And the River Fire is 27,000 acres with 7% containment. So now I'll just try to do a 10-minute summary of everything you need to know about the Dixie Fire. Before I do that, I'm going to take a quick look at the live chat to see if anybody has posted any questions that I should cover before I do that. So Janesville for the next 24 hours. It looks like we still have a bit of distance between the Dixie Fire and Janesville. Again, if we zoom in here, you can see where that hotspot is and where Janesville is. So we do still have some distance there. But, so I think, I probably should never say things like this, but I think we're good for the next 24 hours. Again, if you actually live in that area, 100%, don't take my word for it. Go to your local resources, get the most recent evacuation orders. But I would say I think we're going to be good for the next 24 hours. But as we get into Wednesday and Thursday, and the temperatures get up into the high 90s, relative humidity in the single digits, that's where I think there's going to be some concern as those southwesterly winds try to just continue to push this fire farther to the northeast. But again, we have a lot of resources on the Dixie Fire, so hopefully they're just getting some great lines in here in the meantime. They'll have some time to be able to get those lines in to protect those communities before that fire gets up there. But going to take one quick sip of water, and then we'll do the 10-minute summary of everything you need to know about the Dixie Fire. So rainy season for Northern California is the winter, and that's actually something somebody asked yesterday, is why is wildfire so bad in California? Again, there's probably 100 different things you could focus on for that. You have the fact that 85% of California is in extreme drought. You have the fact that fuel moisture is the driest it's ever been recorded. You have the fact that there's a lot of fuels, and a large amount of those fuels have been killed by bark beetles, with millions of dead trees throughout much of Northern California and the Sierras. But just taking out the extreme factors, you can see consistency in the parts of the world that have the worst wildfires, and it's typically the Mediterranean climates. So by that I mean California, Greece, Italy, Australia. and we're actually seeing some large wildfires in places like Greece and Italy as of right now. Australia, not this time of the year since they're on the other half of the world and this is their winter. But the reason that Mediterranean climates see the worst wildfires is because this is actually a fact I recently learned recently learned because I've lived in California my whole life, so I just assumed that winter is the rainy season, summer is the dry season. But for most of the world, winter is actually their dry season and summer is their rainy season. So for most of the world, they get most of their rain during summer, which helps them with wildfire because when they have the hottest conditions, they're not combining those hot conditions with extremely dry fuels, low relative humidity, and no rainfall. Whereas in California, we get our rainfall during the winters. In the last 2 winters, haven't been getting very much rainfall, only about 50% of our average, which is why about 85% of the state's in drought. But the fact that we have dry summers, that's just the part of our climate, that's just how Mediterranean climates are. That's why Mediterranean climates have the worst wildfires. It's because at the time when you have your warmest temperatures, you're also having your dry season. So it's just a perfect recipe for wildfire. So went on a couple tangents there. So now I will do the 10-minute update on everything you need to know about the Dixie Fire. Start with the satellite imagery. Early this morning, and apologies for not looking at the chat at all over the next 10 minutes, but want to just kind of wrap it up, and you know how I get pulled off in tangents. So focusing on the Dixie Fire here, over the early morning hours, we actually had some nice smoke over the area, and I say nice smoke because it was keeping our temperatures low, it was keeping our winds low as well, and it was keeping the fire behavior relatively moderated. But over the afternoon hours, we were able to break through that smoke inversion, and you can see just the massive pyrocumulus cloud that's been popping off of the northeastern section of this fire over the last few hours. Seeing a lot of activity on the northern section of the fire as well, and a little bit more on the western edge than we had been seeing in previous days. But again, key area to look at is that northeastern section where we're seeing quite possibly the largest pyrocumulus cloud that I've seen since we started following the Dixie Fire about 3 weeks ago. So seeing all that another way, going back to the beginning here, you can see that smoke inversion, which was just keeping the fire activity somewhat moderated. And then as we got into the afternoon hours and even further into the evening, that's where that pyrocumulus cloud just starts popping off as we broke through the inversion layer and started to see more extreme fire behavior. So just looking at that one other way, we can look at the natural color fire, because this is where you can actually see where the fire itself is burning the hottest. Have that western edge, have that northern edge, but most of the activity throughout the last few hours has been on the northeastern section of the Dixie Fire as it wraps around where the sheep fire burned in 2020. So if we actually zoom into that section, because I think that is the key spot that we will be focusing on over the next couple of days, you can see that where the sheep fire was in 2020 burned out a large amount of fuels, and you can imagine there's also probably some containment lines in here. So because of that, they've been able to stop this part of the Dixie Fire basically in its tracks. Now the bad news is that now the Dixie Fire is just going around the sheep fire, and most of that activity that we are seeing over the last few hours is in this northeastern section right here. We can actually look at the live hotspots to see the evidence for that. You can see large amount of activity going on right there. Satellites picking up a large heat signature, and that, in my opinion, is the top priority and the top place to watch over the next few days as our temperatures get back into the mid 90s, our relative humidity in the single digits, and in the afternoon hours we're going to have strong southwesterly winds which will act to continue to push this fire further to the northeast. So again, that is in my opinion, the top priority, because you can see we have a large amount of structures to the northeast of where the Dixie Fire is burning the most actively. Again, if you look at the scale on this map, that down there in the bottom left corner shows 3 miles, and it looks like you could fit about 3 of those bars between where we're picking up the hotspots and areas like Janesville and Buntingville. So we do have a fair bit of room between the fire and those communities. And the other good news is we have about 5,800 actually more than that now. We added some personnel since we last checked. We have a large amount of personnel and resources on this fire, and I know they are deploying more and more to this northeastern section to get some lines in there, and they do have some time to get those lines in to hopefully be able to just stop that fire in its tracks and protect those areas. Again, if you're in those areas, I purposely don't keep up with evacuation orders because I think I just put the links for that in the description. I purposely don't go over those because if a middleman is involved in that kind of information, it just opens up the possibility to err. But the links are there, and if you live in any of the regions around the Dixie Fire, I'd be sure to stay updated with all the local information. Now, where we do have some good news coming out for the Dixie Fire is zooming in here. This was the area that we were the most concerned about yesterday. It almost kind of looked like that. I'd say not as bad, but somewhat close. We had that huge hotspot right here yesterday. It looked like it was bumping straight into the structures on the east shore of Lake Almanor and the southern edge of Westwood. But the good news is much less of a hotspot throughout the afternoon hours today. And the other good news is when we watched that CAL FIRE update, they said that they have lots of resources in both of those areas that have been working on structure protection for a number of days. They have some great dozer lines. And they said that no structures in those areas have been destroyed yet. So that is one area that we are looking much better in for the Dixie Fire. Again, just zooming out. Key spot I'm going to be watching over the next couple days is that northeastern section and that northern section as well, but mostly that northeastern section because that has the potential to go towards the largest amount of structures. Again, thank you, Lucy, for another super chat. You are just too generous. Like I said earlier, you're doing an awesome job moderating, same as you, White Dove. I should be the one sending you guys super chats for keeping the chat as great and informative as I've seen throughout the course of this video. But again, northeastern section of the fire, that's going to be the top spot that I'm watching over the next couple of days, as we are returning to some very critical fire weather conditions. I'll just pull that up one more time so I can drive that point home. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, looks like it's going to be some very tricky conditions for wildfire. Main reason for that is, let's go back to the beginning here, as that low exits the region that was keeping our temperatures down, what's going to be taking its place is just this massive ridge over the entire west. So that's going to bring some very warm and some very dry conditions with it where we get relative humidity back into the single digits. So with that ridge, with that dry air, it's more normal California conditions. So we won't have as extreme of wind gusts as we had when that low came through and caused the red flag warning, where we had the 35 to 45 mile per hour wind gusts in some areas. But what that ridge will be causing are those very warm temperatures. We can see tomorrow afternoon we are expected to be in the mid 90s, and our humidity is expected to be in the low teens to the single digits, while we have those southwesterly wind gusts in the afternoon getting up to 15 to 20 miles per hour. So challenging conditions tomorrow. Looks like it's even more challenging conditions on Wednesday, where we still have those 15 to 20 mile per hour wind gusts in the afternoon. Again, that's just a constant feature of this area as those winds shift up canyon during the day. But we're also going to be seeing some mid 90 temperatures. Once again, some relative humidity in the low teens to single digits. Thursday, it looks like this pattern continues. Temperatures still in the mid 90s. Humidity still in the low teens to single digits. And those wind gusts, once again, 15 to 20 miles per hour in the afternoon hours. That'll update in a second. Looks like stronger winds on Thursday. So Thursday may be the key day that we have to watch out for. Now the good news is, we looked at this earlier, Friday. Oh, wow. Okay, so looks like the models have updated from what we were seeing earlier. Earlier, it was showing that we were going to drop back into the 80s on Friday. Maybe I just clicked a slightly different dot here. but looks like Friday is going to still be extremely hot. Mid-90s, relative humidity in the low teens and single digits with those wind gusts as well. So very challenging fire weather conditions moving forward. Again, we've had a large amount of activity over the last few days, and over the last few days we had that low pressure system going through Washington that was bringing our temperatures back into the 80s, some cooler temps, slightly more moisture in our area. But as that leaves, we're going to return to more critical fire weather conditions, which is concerning because we had a large amount of growth over the last few days. So it's concerning to see that the conditions are going to be getting worse. Now, I am certainly not going to end the video on that negative of a note. So something I will say is that we still have a massive amount of resources on the Dixie Fire, almost 6,000 personnel, and we do have that 2020 sheep fire scar, which seems to be at least calming down. Switch back to the perimeter. At least seems to be calming down part of the Dixie Fire. But again, we'll have to keep our eye on that section as it moves around the sheep fire scar. So tricky conditions over the next few days, but I will be here every step of the way. I will continue to do these longer form live streams in the afternoons and evenings, mostly the evenings, as that's been the time of the fire where we've seen the most activity. And if you do want to continue to watch these, you can subscribe to the channel, and you can also hit the notification bell so that when I go live, you are notified, and then you're able to watch. The last few things I'll say is, one, if you live around the Dixie Fire, to always try to stay updated with the most recent information on evacuation orders. Two, my thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by these wildfires, including everybody who has been perhaps had gotten news that their structure was destroyed. That was maybe the worst news throughout this entire forecast today, that we are up to 873 structures destroyed on the Dixie Fire. But the good news was that in the last 24 hours, we actually went down 7,000 acres. I believe they remapped it and reduced the number of acreage burned. So that was some good news there. But again, still the second largest wildfire in the history of California. We'll continue to follow this, especially over the next few days as those critical fire weather conditions come in. We'll end it with this one last look at that large power cumulus cloud that came in throughout the day today. And overall, I think the last how I'll end it is by saying we were able to get through 2020, and 2020 saw, I think, 3 out of 5 of the largest wildfires in the history of California. So we will be able to get through 2021 as well. Californians are resilient. So thanks again for everybody who's watched and for all the great questions throughout this video. Hope you all have a great night, and I'll see you all tomorrow.